History is filled with whispers that were never meant to be heard. For thousands of years, entire nations built their power, their culture, and their very survival on secrets they took to the grave. This is a journey through 35 ancient civilizations that mastered the art of staying hidden, from jungle empires that vanished without a trace to desert kingdoms that guarded their wealth in plain sight. By the end, you will see the ancient world through an entirely new lens, one where silence spoke louder than any monument. How did a civilization thrive for centuries without leaving a single word we can read today? What incredible technology was so valuable that its creators would rather let it vanish than share it? The answers redefine what we think we know about the past. What does it truly mean for a society to disappear? The story of secrets begins not with a whisper, but with the silent gaze of stone giants emerging from the jungle floor. Deep in the humid lowlands of what is now Mexico, the Olmec civilization laid the foundation for everything that would follow in Mesoamerica, from the Maya to the Aztecs. Yet for a culture so foundational, they left behind remarkably little they intended for us to understand. They are called the mother culture, but she is a mother who never wrote her name. Their origins are a complete mystery, appearing suddenly around 3,500 years ago with a fully formed artistic style, complex ceremonial centers, and a social hierarchy. There is no record of where they came from or what language they spoke. Their entire history is an archaeological puzzle, assembled from fragments they did not mean to preserve. Their most famous and baffling artifacts are the colossal stone heads, 17 of which have been discovered. Carved from single blocks of volcanic basalt, some weighing over 20 tons, these heads depict helmeted figures with stern, distinct faces. But who are they? Ancient kings, revered ball players, or perhaps deified ancestors? We simply do not know. The deeper secret is how they moved these monoliths. The nearest source of this basalt is over 50 miles away, through swamps and dense jungle, without the wheel or draft animals. The method remains one of archaeology's great silent triumphs, a logistical secret lost to time. Their decline is equally shrouded. Around 2,400 years ago, their great centers like San Lorenzo and La Venta were deliberately and systematically destroyed. Monuments were defaced and buried in long, straight lines. This was not an invasion by a foreign enemy, at least not one we can identify. It appears to be an act of self-inflicted ritual termination, a willful erasure led by the Olmecs themselves. They dismantled their own world and walked away, leaving their colossal heads half sunken in the mud as the only witnesses. What crisis, what profound shift in belief or power could compel a people to bury their own history so completely? The jungle reclaimed their cities, and for over 1,000 years the mother culture slept, her secrets kept by the earth itself. While the Olmecs vanished into the jungle, another secretive civilization was flourishing on an island surrounded by the deep blue sea. On the sun-drenched island of Crete, the Minoans built a world of breathtaking sophistication and profound mystery, a culture so advanced it would fuel legends for millennia. Their greatest secret is not a single artifact, but an entire way of life we can see but cannot hear. We walk through the ruins of their magnificent palace at Knossos, a complex so vast and bewildering with its countless rooms, corridors, and storerooms that it gave birth to the most enduring myth of secrecy, the labyrinth. This was said to be the home of King Minos and the terrifying Minotaur, a half-man, half-bull monster hidden at its heart. The myth is a powerful metaphor. It tells us that to the outside world, perhaps even to later Greeks, Minoan Crete was an impenetrable maze of power and strange ritual. The real labyrinth, however, is their language. The Minoans wrote in a script scholars call Linear A. We have found thousands of clay tablets inscribed with it, records of goods, supplies, and transactions that managed a vast maritime trading empire. We can see the numbers, we can recognize the administrative purpose, but the words themselves are utterly silent. Linear has never been deciphered. It means we can look directly at their inventory lists, but we have no idea what they called the very goods they traded. Their poetry, their laws, their names for their gods, all of it remains locked away, a secret kept by the very people who wrote it down. This silence makes their society even more intriguing. The archaeology paints a picture unlike any other in the ancient world. Their palaces have no fortifications. Their art shows graceful athletes leaping over bulls, elegant processions, and vibrant scenes from nature, but remarkably few depictions of warfare or conquest. Was this a genuinely peaceful thalassocracy, a sea power based on trade and cultural influence rather than military might? Or is this peacefulness itself an illusion, a carefully curated secret projected to the world? Their end is shrouded in cataclysm and slow fade. Around 3,600 years ago, the volcanic island of Thera, north of Crete, exploded in one of the largest eruptions in human history. The blast would have been heard across continents, sending tsunamis crashing into Crete's northern shores and blanketing the island in ash. This catastrophe did not immediately destroy the Minoans, but it crippled their fleet, ruined their harvests, and shattered their economic network. In this weakened state, they became vulnerable. Within a few centuries, the palace centers show the arrival of a new writing system, Linear B, which we can read. It is an early form of Greek used by the Mycenaeans from the mainland. The Minoan world did not so much collapse as it was quietly absorbed, its secrets layered over by a new culture that adopted their administrative tools but forgot their language. The labyrinth was not destroyed, it was simply repurposed, its original blueprint forever lost. So we are left with a beautiful, haunting paradox, a civilization we can admire in exquisite detail, but whose voice we will never truly hear. What stories of the sea, what prayers to forgotten gods are contained in those silent lines of clay? But the urge to build a perfect, silent society was not unique to the Mediterranean. Far to the east, along the fertile floodplains of the Indus River, another civilization achieved something almost unthinkable, a secret woven into the very bricks of their cities. The people of the Indus Valley, also called the Harappans, flourished from around 3,300 to 1,300 BCE, across an area larger than ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia combined. Their greatest secret was not a hidden treasure or a lost language, though they had that too. Their secret was an entire social order that defies our basic understanding of ancient power. Walk through the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro or Harappa. You see wide, straight streets laid out in a precise grid, advanced drainage systems with covered sewers, and uniform, baked brick houses. It is a marvel of urban planning that would not be matched for thousands of years. Yet here is the profound puzzle where you search for the heartbeat of a civilization and find only a steady, quiet pulse. Where are the palaces? There are no towering ziggurats, no gargantuan pyramids, no colossal statues of kings. Where are the grand temples? No structures clearly dedicated to gods or priesthoods have been conclusively identified. Where is the evidence of war? Archaeologists have found no fortifications, no caches of weapons, no grandiose art celebrating conquest. This absence is deafening. It suggests a society that organized itself around principles we can barely grasp, perhaps a form of collective governance or an oligarchy of merchants so stable it needed no monuments to individual glory. Their secrecy is etched in stone, literally. They developed a writing system with over 400 distinct symbols found on seals and tablets, but the Indus script remains one of the great unbroken codes of the ancient world. The inscriptions are frustratingly short, usually just a handful of symbols, and we have no Rosetta Stone, no bilingual text to crack it open. We cannot read a single word. So we see a people who traded with Mesopotamia, who standardized weights and measures across a vast region to an astonishing degree, but we cannot hear their names, their laws, or their stories. Then there is the Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro, a large, waterproofed public tank that speaks to ritual, but a ritual for what? Was it for religious purification, a communal civic activity, or something else entirely? The famous statue dubbed the Priest King, with its serene, bearded face and patterned robe, hints at authority, but was he a king, a priest, or a respected elder? We simply do not know. Their decline is the final layer of the mystery. This meticulously ordered civilization did not fall to a dramatic invasion. Instead, around 1900 BC, the cities began to be slowly, systematically abandoned. The leading theory points to climate change, a gradual shift in monsoon patterns, or the drying up of the Gaga-Hakra river system that sustained them. The people did not vanish, they likely migrated east and south, their culture dissipating and blending into new communities. But their urban ideal, their secret of a seemingly egalitarian, peaceful, and hyper-organized society, faded from history. The Indus Valley civilization presents us with a haunting alternative blueprint for human civilization, one that chose collective well-being over glorifying rulers, and in doing so, left behind a puzzle more compelling than any golden treasure. What does their silence tell us about the many different ways a society can succeed, and the many different ways it can choose to be remembered? Yet the desire to forge a distinct identity in the shadow of a giant is its own form of secrecy. Just south of ancient Egypt, along the winding Nile in what is now Sudan, the kingdom of Kush rose not as a mere copy, but as a powerful, enigmatic rival that for centuries held the keys to a technology Egypt itself could not master. While history often remembers them as Egypt's southern neighbor, this view misses their profound secret. They were the keepers of the Iron Age. While Egypt clung to the power of bronze, the Kushites delved deep into the earth, becoming unparalleled masters of iron smelting. Their furnaces, fueled by the abundant acacia trees of the region, burned hotter than any before, transforming raw ore into the strongest metal of the age. This was not just an industrial advantage, it was a source of immense strategic and mystical power. Iron weapons were harder and held a sharper edge than bronze, and iron tools could clear land and shape stone with unprecedented efficiency. This technological secret gave Kush the strength to do the unthinkable, conquer their legendary northern neighbor. Around 744 BC, Kushite kings marched north, seizing control of Egypt and establishing the 25th dynasty, a line of pharaohs who ruled the Nile from Sudan to the Mediterranean Sea. For nearly a century, the so-called Black Pharaohs like Pi and Taharqa governed Egypt, restoring its traditional arts and religion even as they brought their own Kushite customs. This was the ultimate reversal, the student becoming the master, yet it is a chapter often minimized in the grand narrative of Egypt. Their power eventually receded back to their homeland, but their independence only grew more distinct. They moved their capital south to Meroitic, a city that became the heart of a new, confident Kush. Here, they built their own pyramids, over 200 of them, steeper and more compact than the Egyptian versions, standing as silent sentinels in the desert. These pyramids at Meroitic hold the buried secrets of their rulers, but unlike in Egypt, the inscriptions within are written in a script we cannot fully comprehend. The Meroitic script, an elegant alphabetic writing system developed around the 2nd century BC, is a locked door. We can sound out the words, we know the phonetic values of the letters, but the language itself remains untranslated. We stand before their royal tombs, able to read the sounds of a king's name aloud, yet having no idea what his titles or prayers actually mean. Their culture became a brilliant, intentional blend, a secret recipe of influences. They worshipped Egyptian gods like Ammon, but alongside distinctly African deities like the lion-headed Apedemak. Their art fused Egyptian formalism with vibrant, robust styles that were uniquely their own. The kingdom of Kush was not hiding in the shadows of Egypt. It was crafting a parallel, powerful identity right next door, one that mastered the secrets of fire and metal, conquered empires, and then chose to write its final story in a language meant for itself alone. What histories of conquest and faith are etched into those untranslated stones beside the Nile? From the sun-baked pyramids of Kush, we travel north to the rugged highlands of Anatolia, where a different kind of secret was forged, not in isolation, but in the complex web of international intrigue. The Hittite Empire was a superpower of the Bronze Age, a nation that understood that true power often lay not just in the sword, but in the carefully chosen word and the closely guarded technique. Their capital, Hattusa, was a fortress of secrets carved into the stone of a windswept plateau. Approaching its gates, you would first face walls of such immense, cyclopean scale they seemed to grow from the mountain itself. But the true ingenuity was hidden. Beneath the city ran a labyrinth of secret tunnels, escape routes and sally ports that allowed defenders to move unseen, to disappear and reappear like ghosts during a siege. The most famous entrance is the Lion Gate, where two massive, snarling stone felines stand guard, their expressions frozen in a perpetual, silent warning to any who would threaten the empire within. The Hittites were masters of a new and terrifying material, iron. While they may not have been the absolute first to smelt it, they perfected its production on a scale that turned it into a strategic asset. They guarded the techniques of creating superior, hardened iron weapons, giving their military a cutting-edge advantage that was the envy of the ancient world. This was a state secret of the highest order, a technological monopoly that helped them hold their own against rivals like Egypt. Yet for all their martial prowess, their lasting legacy is one of parchment and clay. Within Hattusa's walls, in vast royal archives, they stored thousands upon thousands of cuneiform tablets. This was not a secret library, but its contents reveal how they ruled through a different kind of power, information, and diplomacy. These tablets preserve the world's first known international peace treaty, the Treaty of Kadesh, signed with Pharaoh Ramesses II of Egypt. They detail complex laws, meticulous royal annals, and correspondence with other kings, showing an empire that functioned through meticulous record-keeping and savvy political negotiation. Then, around 1200 BCE, at the height of the late Bronze Age collapse, the Hittite Empire vanished from the stage of history with shocking speed. Hattusa was not conquered in a great, recorded battle. It was burned and abandoned. The archives, so carefully maintained, were left to bake in the fires that consumed the city. The mystery of their collapse is a perfect storm of unknowns. Did a cascade of crop failures and famine cripple them from within? Were they overrun by the mysterious sea peoples, marauding groups that swept across the Mediterranean? Or was it a fatal combination of internal rebellion and external pressure that caused the entire imperial structure to implode? The Hittite people did not disappear, they simply melted away, their identity dissolving as they scattered into small, independent city-states in Syria and Anatolia, their imperial language and unity forgotten. For centuries, the Hittites themselves became a secret, a giant mentioned in the Bible and Egyptian texts but lost to tangible history, their great capital mistaken for a natural rock formation. It was only when archaeologists deciphered those clay tablets from the ashes of Hattusa that the empire re-emerged from the shadows, revealing a sophisticated civilization that knew the value of both the iron sword and the ironclad treaty. How does an entire imperial identity, so carefully documented, simply dissolve into the landscape? The silent lions at the gate still have no answer. The Hittites vanished into the smoke of history, but in the vast river valleys of East Asia, another dynasty was inscribing its secrets onto the very bones of animals. The Shang dynasty, emerging around 1600 BCE, represents the first solid historical foundation of Chinese civilization, yet it was a world deliberately veiled in mystery, where communication with the unseen was a state secret. Their power was cast in bronze, an art they elevated to a spiritual science. In massive, state-controlled foundries, artisans created breathtaking vessels, not for mundane use but for sacred rituals dedicated to ancestors and gods. These were not mere pots, they were ceremonial cauldrons and wine goblets of staggering complexity, adorned with intricate patterns and the staring face of the Tauti, a mythical beast. The secret was in the process, a technique known as piece mold casting that allowed for unprecedented detail and size. This was more than metallurgy, it was a monopoly on the very medium of divine communication, a physical symbol of royal authority that common people would never touch or fully understand. But the most intimate secret of the Shang court was written on ox shoulder blades and turtle plastrons. Divination was the empire's operating system. The king or his high priests would pose urgent questions to the royal ancestors. Will the harvest be bountiful? Should we go to war? Is the king's toothache an omen? They would then apply a hot metal point to the bone, causing it to crack. The pattern of the cracks was the ancestors' cryptic reply, and here the secret ritual became permanent history. The date, the question, the prophecy, and even the later outcome were often carved in an early form of Chinese characters directly onto the bone. This was writing born from secrecy, a coded log of celestial guidance meant only for the elite. These oracle bones, buried in pits for millennia, became our key to unlocking their world, but they reveal a society obsessed with the hidden. The Shang capital was not a fixed point of power. Historical records and archaeology show they moved their primary city multiple times. Why would a thriving dynasty uproot its entire administrative and religious heart? Was it due to floods, shifts in political alliances, or perhaps a ritual necessity, a belief that the mandate from heaven required a fresh, purified location? The reason remains one of their strategic mysteries, a logistical secret that kept rivals and subjects off balance. The full darkness of their secrecy, however, was reserved for the tomb. At the royal burial site of Yingsu, we see the ultimate expression of belief in an afterlife mirroring this one, but at a horrifying cost. A Shang king was not buried alone. His tomb complex included chariots, treasures, and scores of human sacrifices, from warriors and servants to entire households. These individuals, often beheaded or buried alive, were meant to accompany and serve the ruler in the next world. This practice was a closely guarded aspect of royal privilege, a final, brutal demonstration of power that was hidden from public view, conducted in the deep, sacred earth. The Shang dynasty presents a profound duality. They gave us the first verifiable chapter of Chinese history through their writings, yet those writings document a world where truth was reserved for the gods and the king, where the most important messages were etched in bone and cast in bronze, and where a ruler's final journey was the most closely kept secret of all. What does it mean when a civilization's first historical records are literally the secret minutes of a private conversation with the dead? High on the windswept plateaus of northern Ethiopia, a kingdom rose to power not by conquest alone, but by controlling a secret whispered along every trade route from Rome to India. The kingdom of Aksum was a giant of the ancient world, a Christian empire in Africa that minted its own gold coins, commanded the Red Sea, and left behind monuments of such staggering scale they seem to defy the very landscape. Their greatest secret is not what they built but what they claimed to guard. In their heartland, the field of Stele stands as a silent, towering mystery. These are not mere markers but colossal stone obelisks, the largest of which, now fallen, once soared over 100 feet high, taller than a 10-story building. Carved from single slabs of solid granite, they are intricately detailed with false doors, windows, and beam ends, as if they were not monuments but ethereal skyscrapers for the dead, representations of multi-story palaces the deceased would inhabit in the afterlife. How did they quarry, transport, and erect such monoliths without the wheel or pulleys? The method is lost, a secret of engineering and mass organization. Yet these physical giants are overshadowed by a spiritual claim that echoes through history. Aksum's rulers, after converting to Christianity in the 4th century, declared their sacred city housed the ultimate relic, the Ark of the Covenant itself. According to their tradition, the Ark, containing the original stone tablets given to Moses, was brought from Jerusalem by Meroitic, the son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. It is said to reside to this day in a small chapel in Aksum, guarded by a single, devoted monk who is its lifelong keeper. This is not a hidden secret, but a proclaimed one, a claim of divine legitimacy so profound and unverifiable that it becomes the ultimate locked door. No outsider has ever been allowed to see it. The claim transformed Aksum into a second Zion, a spiritual capital whose authority was rooted in a secret too sacred to ever be displayed. Their voice comes to us in a unique script Ge'ez, inscribed on stone thrones and royal tablets. Ge'ez evolved into the liturgical language of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. We can read it, but the early inscriptions are often terse royal proclamations, leaving the inner workings of their society, the details of their daily governance and trade agreements, still shrouded in mystery. Their wealth was no secret, however. Aksumite gold coins bearing the faces of their kings and Christian crosses have been found from Egypt to Sri Lanka, a testament to a commercial network that rivaled Rome's. So what happened to this powerful Christian empire? Their decline is a slow fade tied to the changing secrets of the earth and sea. Environmental shifts, perhaps over farming and deforestation, may have degraded their agricultural base. More crucially, the rise of the Islamic Caliphate in the 7th century gradually redirected the lucrative trade routes of the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean, bypassing Aksum's ports. The empire did not fall in a dramatic invasion, it simply contracted, its economic lifeblood slowing as the world's commerce found new channels. The great stelae were left standing, silent sentinels over a kingdom that retreated into the highlands, its imperial grandeur condensed into a deep, enduring faith and the guardianship of a single, unseen chest. What does it mean for a nation's power to be sustained not just by armies and coins, but by the unwavering belief in a secret it promises to protect forever? While Aksum guarded a sacred secret on land, another civilization mastered the art of secrecy on the open sea. The Phoenicians were the ghosts of the ancient Mediterranean, a people who built their entire identity not on sprawling empires but on the hidden knowledge of currents, stars, and a color worth more than gold. Their world was the wooden deck of a ship, and their power was measured in the secrets they kept from the shore. They emerged from a narrow strip of coast in what is now Lebanon, a land hemmed in by mountains and rival empires. With nowhere to expand but outward, they turned to the horizon, becoming the greatest navigators and merchants the world had yet seen. Their greatest secret was the map inside their minds. To protect their lucrative trade networks, they cultivated an aura of mystery and danger around the routes to the sources of wealth. Stories of sea monsters, treacherous whirlpools, and impassable fog banks were not just sailors' tales. They were strategic disinformation, a calculated effort to deter competitors from following in their wake. A Phoenician captain's knowledge of a safe harbor, a seasonal wind, or a hidden source of tin in far-off Britain was a trade secret as valuable as any cargo. This culture of guarded knowledge led to one of history's most profound and paradoxical gifts, the alphabet. Needing an efficient, simple way to record transactions and inventories, they streamlined complex earlier writing systems into a set of just 22 symbols that represented consonant sounds. This was not created to spread wisdom or poetry. It was a tool for commerce, a secret code for accountants and ship's captains to track goods and contracts. Yet, in its elegant simplicity, this tool for secrecy became the ultimate agent of disclosure. As Phoenician traders established ports from Cyprus to Spain, their practical script traveled with them. The Greeks adopted it, adding vowels, and from there it spread, evolving into the Latin, Cyrillic, and Arabic alphabets that billions use today. The very system they crafted for private business became the foundation of public literacy across the Western world. But one secret they managed to keep for centuries was the formula for the color purple. Tyrian purple, named for their great city of Tyre, was a dye of such stunning, deep violet crimson that it became synonymous with royalty and godly status. The process was revolting and meticulous. It required harvesting thousands of a specific sea snail, the spiny dye murex, cracking their shells, and extracting a tiny gland to produce a yellowish liquid that, when exposed to sunlight, transformed through a series of colors into the legendary purple. The stench from the dye vats was so infamous that workshops were placed downwind of cities. They guarded every step of this biochemical recipe, turning a common mollusk into the most exclusive status symbol of the ancient world, a literal monopoly on the color of power. Their most enduring and secretive legacy, however, was a colony that would eclipse its mother. On the coast of North Africa, they founded Carthage. According to legend, Princess Dido bargained for as much land as could be covered by a single ox hide. She then cut the hide into an impossibly thin strip encircling a vast hilltop, securing the site for her new city. This clever trick set the tone for Carthage's future, a place built on cunning and strategic secrecy. While Phoenician cities like Tyre eventually fell to foreign empires, Carthage grew in shadowed strength, becoming a naval and commercial superpower that would one day challenge Rome itself. The Phoenicians themselves never sought to build a monolithic empire you could color on a map. Their empire was a web, a network of trade routes and fortified ports animated by the movement of their ships. They were the connective tissue of the Bronze and Iron Age Mediterranean, yet they left behind surprisingly few grand monuments or personal histories. Their success was in being essential but elusive, the middlemen who knew everyone's business while fiercely protecting their own. What does it mean for a civilization's greatest legacy to be a system of letters they used for ledgers, and a color whose true source they took such pains to hide? The sea lanes of the Phoenicians gave way to a different kind of highway, a vast, rolling ocean of grass where a rider could vanish over the horizon in minutes. Across the immense Eurasian steppe from the Black Sea to the Altai Mountains, the Scythians mastered a form of secrecy that was not about hidden cities, but about becoming a shadow on the land itself. They were the ultimate nomads, a confederation of tribes united by a culture of the horse and the bow, who built no temples, wrote no chronicles, and left behind only one undeniable signature, the great silent mounds that punctuate the plains. To their settled neighbors, from the Persians to the Greeks, they were both terrifying and enigmatic, a whirlwind of mounted archers who could appear without warning and dissolve just as quickly. Their entire society was a secret kept in motion, a military tactic woven into the fabric of daily life. How do you conquer a people who have no capital to besiege, no fields to burn, and no fixed address to find? The Greeks, who faced them on the northern edges of their world, were fascinated. The historian Herodotus, writing from second-hand accounts, described them with a mix of awe and anthropological curiosity, detailing their customs, their fierce independence, and a chilling practice of making drinking cups from the skulls of their enemies. His writings are our primary window, but they are the observations of an outsider looking in, a portrait of a people who chose never to paint their own. The Scythians spoke an Iranian language, but they developed no written script. Their history, their laws, their poetry, all of it was an oral tradition carried on the wind, lost the moment the last storyteller died. This was not a lack of sophistication, but a deliberate choice. A culture on horseback has no need for archives. Its records are in the kinship ties remembered, the grazing routes memorized, and the battle honors sung around the fire. Their true voice, the one they meant for eternity, was spoken in gold. They buried their elite in spectacular tomb mounds called kurgans. These were not simple graves, but colossal earthworks, artificial hills constructed over deep burial chambers. Within these frozen chambers, preserved by the permafrost of places like Pazyryk in Siberia, we find their secrets perfectly kept. Chieftains were interred with everything needed for the afterlife, including their horses, fully harnessed and sacrificed. The artifacts are breathtaking, a stunning blend of animalistic style and technical mastery. Gold plaques depict stags in fluid, leaping motion, panthers locked in combat, and griffins with curled beaks. These pieces, meant to adorn clothing, weapons, and horse tack, tell a story of a world alive with spiritual energy, where every creature was part of a sacred, interlocking force. Yet the most intimate secret comes from the contents of a small pouch. Herodotus described a ritual where Scythians would enter a felt tent, throw cannabis seeds onto hot stones, and inhale the vapors, howling with pleasure. Archaeology has confirmed this, finding hemp seeds and miniature tents in burial contexts. This was not mere recreation, but a sacred rite, a way to alter consciousness and commune with the spirit world, a private, smoky sacrament shared only among the initiated. The Scythian paradox is profound. They were a people defined by ephemeral movement, yet they invested immense labor to create permanent, hidden vaults for their dead. They communicated nothing to the future in written words, yet they shouted their status and beliefs in the most brilliant and durable metal. They were ghosts to their enemies, but in death they became immovable kings of the underworld, their treasures waiting silently under the grass for thousands of years, until the spade of an archaeologist finally broke the seal on their golden silence. What does it mean for a people's entire legacy to be entrusted not to libraries, but to the frozen ground and the accounts of those who feared them? The golden silence of the Scythian steppes finds a strange echo in the wooded hills of ancient Italy. Before the Roman legions marched, before the Republic was even a dream, a sophisticated and enigmatic people held sway over the land, the Etruscans. They built prosperous cities, created art of stunning vitality, and shaped the cultural DNA of their eventual conquerors, yet they left behind a central mystery that whispers from every inscription, a language we can see but cannot truly hear. The Etruscans spoke and wrote a tongue unrelated to any other in the region, a non-Indo-European language that stands as an isolated island in a sea of Latin. We have over 13,000 inscriptions, from short dedications on pottery to the lengthy, ritual text of the Zagreb mummy wrappings. We can read the letters borrowed from Greek, and we can sound out the words. We know the grammar, we understand numbers and some names of gods, but the meaning of the vast majority of their vocabulary, the stories they told, the laws they passed, all of it remains locked away. It is like having a book where you recognize every letter on the page, but the sentences themselves are a beautiful, frustrating cipher. This linguistic curtain makes their vivid tomb paintings all the more poignant. In the underground chambers of Tarquinia and Servitory, the walls explode with color and life. We see banquets with couples reclining on couches, dancers moving to the music of pipes, athletes competing in games, and scenes of hunting and fishing. This is not a somber vision of death, but a joyous celebration of existence, a belief that the afterlife was a continuation of earthly pleasures. Yet without their language, we do not know the names of these people, the stories behind the myths they depicted, or the exact prayers that accompanied these scenes. We are silent guests at their eternal party. Their technical skill was no secret, however, and it directly fed the rise of Rome. The Etruscans were master metallurgists and hydraulic engineers. They drained the marshes around Rome, laying the foundation for the Forum. They taught the early Romans the art of constructing temples, of conducting augury by reading the flight of birds, and even the symbols of political authority, the fasces and the purple-bordered toga. The famous Capitoline wolf, the symbol of Rome itself, is an Etruscan bronze. Their most stunning metallic secret is the chimera of Arezzo, a bronze statue of the mythical fire-breathing beast, part lion, part goat, part serpent, caught in a moment of coiled, snarling fury. The craftsmanship is exquisite, demonstrating a lost wax casting technique of the highest order. This was not just art, it was a display of technological and artistic mastery that their Roman students would spend centuries emulating. For all their influence, the Romans viewed Etruscan religion with a mix of respect and deep suspicion. Etruscan priests, known as haruspices, practiced a complex and secretive form of divination called haruspicy, which involved reading the will of the gods in the livers of sacrificed animals. They had entire bronze models of livers divided into sections corresponding to different deities, a map of the heavens found in entrails. To the pragmatic Roman mind, this was a powerful but ominous knowledge, a foreign magic that spoke of a deeper, older connection to the unseen world that both attracted and unnerved them. The origin of the Etruscans was a puzzle even in antiquity. The Greek historian Herodotus claimed they migrated from Lydia in Asia Minor, while another ancient writer, Dionysius of Halicarnassus, argued they were indigenous to Italy. Modern DNA studies have added layers but no definitive answer, suggesting a complex mixture of local and Near Eastern ancestry. Their end was not destruction but a slow, deep assimilation. As Rome grew in power, it gradually absorbed Etruscan cities through alliance and conquest. The Etruscan elite were granted Roman citizenship, their children grew up speaking Latin, and their distinctive culture faded into the fabric of the rising empire. Their language died out, surviving only in those thousands of silent stone inscriptions. The Etruscans present us with a haunting paradox, a civilization that taught Rome how to build a world, yet could not leave behind the words to explain their own. What stories of love, power, and faith are forever trapped in those painted tombs, spoken in a tongue that Rome itself chose to forget? The Etruscan language faded into the stones of Italy, but in the blistering deserts of Jordan, another civilization carved its secrets directly into the living rock. The Nabateans were not builders in the traditional sense, they were sculptors of emptiness. Their greatest achievement, the city of Petra, was a masterpiece of hidden power, a fortress of commerce designed to be discovered only when they wished it to be. Approaching their capital was an act of revelation controlled by the Nabateans themselves. You would not see a city from a distance. Instead, you entered a narrow, winding fissure in the sandstone mountains called the Sick. This was not a natural pathway they simply used, it was a calculated feature of their defense and mystique. For over a mile, you would walk through this towering, shadowy corridor, the cliffs soaring hundreds of feet above, the sky reduced to a thin, bright ribbon. The journey was designed to build awe and uncertainty, a psychological preparation. Then, as you rounded a final bend, the Sick would frame a breathtaking sight, the facade of the treasury, Al-Kosne, glowing in the sun, its intricate columns and statues carved with impossible precision directly from the cliff face. This was not a building constructed, but a mountain hollowed out. The genius of Petra was its secrecy as a stronghold. An army could not storm a facade, and the narrow, defensible Sick meant any hostile force could be picked off from the cliffs above. But their true secret, the one that made life possible in that arid landscape, was hidden beneath your feet. The Nabateans were hydrological wizards. In a region receiving barely 6 inches of rain a year, they built a complex, hidden network to capture and control every precious drop. They carved channels into the cliffsides to divert flash floods, constructed dams and cisterns lined with waterproof plaster, and created an underground grid of pipes and reservoirs that fed the city. This water management system was their most closely guarded technology, allowing a population of perhaps 20,000 to thrive in the heart of the desert. It turned Petra from a remote hideout into a luxurious oasis for caravans, a neutral ground where traders from China, India, Arabia, and the Mediterranean could meet, exchange goods, and pay taxes to the Nabatean kings. Their wealth was built on the frankincense and myrrh trade, but their religious world remains a profound enigma. The magnificent facades like the treasury and the monastery are not palaces or tombs in the traditional sense, but something scholars call nephesh or spirit houses. They were ceremonial fronts for high place altars and sacred chambers cut deeper into the rock. The Nabateans worshipped gods like Dashara, a deity represented by a simple aniconic block of stone. Their rituals, possibly involving sacred banquets and libations, were conducted in these secluded, rock-cut sanctuaries, away from the eyes of the bustling city below. We have their inscriptions written in a precursor to Arabic, but they are mostly short dedications, not detailed theological texts. The heart of their faith is as closed off as the inner chambers behind those glorious facades. Petra's decline is a story of a secret becoming obsolete. For centuries, their power lay in controlling the overland trade routes, but after the Roman Empire annexed the Nabatean kingdom in 106 CE, the world began to change. The Romans valued Petra, but they also built new, efficient roads and promoted sea trade through the Red Sea. Gradually, the caravan traffic that was Petra's lifeblood began to diminish, bypassing the rock-cut city. Then, in 363 CE, a massive earthquake struck, crippling the vital water management system. The Nabateans' descendants likely lacked the specialized knowledge or resources to fully repair the hidden network their ancestors had built. The water stopped and the desert began to reclaim its silence. The people drifted away and Petra was left to the local Bedouin, who kept its existence a closely guarded secret from the Western world for over 1,000 years. It became a rumor, a lost city of rose-red stone, until a Swiss explorer disguised as a pilgrim was led there in 1812. So Petra stands as a monument to a secrecy that served two masters, first to protect and empower a desert kingdom, and then to erase it from memory entirely. What does it mean for a civilization's greatest defense to become, in the end, its perfect tomb? The desert silence of Petra gives way to the echoing cries of howler monkeys in a different kind of wilderness. In the dense rainforests of Mesoamerica, the Maya built a civilization of stone and intellect whose secrets were not lost to invasion, but to the jungle's slow, patient embrace. For centuries, their abandoned cities, with pyramids piercing the canopy, were seen as the peaceful temples of stargazing priests. The truth, once their silent stones began to speak, was far more dramatic, a saga of war, ritual, and political intrigue written in a code we finally learned to crack. Their genius was in measuring time itself. While others tracked seasons, the Maya calculated cosmic cycles with breathtaking precision. Their long-count calendar could pinpoint dates millions of years in the past or future, and their understanding of celestial movements like the cycle of Venus was woven into the very architecture of their cities. A pyramid at Chichen Itza becomes a serpent of shadow and light slithering down its steps on the equinoxes, a public alignment that hid deeper astronomical knowledge reserved for the elite scribes and priests who could read the sky as a divine text. This knowledge was recorded in a complex hieroglyphic script, one of the few fully developed writing systems in the ancient Americas. For generations after their collapse, it was an impenetrable secret. The Spanish conquistadors, viewing it as the work of the devil, systematically burned the Mayas' bark paper books, their codices. Only 4 are known to have survived this cultural firestorm. The written voice of an entire civilization was nearly extinguished, leaving behind thousands of carved stone monuments covered in beautiful, silent glyphs. The breakthrough came in the 20th century, not from a single Rosetta Stone, but from the painstaking work of linguists and epigraphers who realized the glyphs represented syllables and words of Mayan languages still spoken today. The silence was broken, and the stones began to tell stories not of peaceful astronomers, but of rival city-states like Tikal and Calakmul locked in brutal warfare, of kings boasting of capturing and sacrificing rival lords, and of intricate dynastic lineages stretching back for generations. The secret history of the Maya was one of politics as ruthless as any in medieval Europe. The most profound secrets, however, were those of blood and sacred sport. Deep within royal palaces, away from public view, kings and queens performed ritual bloodletting. Using stingray spines or obsidian blades, they would pierce their own tongues, earlobes, or genitals, spilling blood onto strips of paper that were then burned. The rising smoke was believed to open a portal to the spirit world, allowing communication with ancestors and gods. This was the ultimate private duty of royalty, a painful sacrifice that validated their right to rule, a secret covenant of suffering between the ruler and the cosmos. Equally charged with hidden meaning was the ball game. Played in massive stone courts, the game was far more than sport. It was a reenactment of cosmic mythology, where the rubber ball represented the sun moving through the underworld. The outcome held profound ritual significance, often tied to themes of fertility and sacrifice. While the exact rules are lost, depictions show that losers, or sometimes perhaps the winning captain, could be ritually sacrificed, their blood ensuring the sun would rise again and the world would continue. The game was a public spectacle with a secret, deadly stakes known only to the participants and the gods. Then, between the 8th and 9th centuries, the heartbeat of the lowland classic Maya civilization faltered and stopped. In city after city, the carving of dated monuments ceased. Palaces were abandoned and the rainforest began its long reclamation. This was not a single event but a slow, mysterious unraveling. The deciphered texts offer no simple explanation, but they hint at a perfect storm of hidden vulnerabilities. Endemic warfare between city-states drained resources and destabilized regions. Episodes of severe drought revealed in lake sediment cores would have crippled agriculture and led to famine and social unrest. The very institution of kingship may have failed, as the ritual bloodletting and promises of divine favor could not make the rains return. The people did not vanish, they migrated, their descendants thriving in the northern Yucatan and highlands of Guatemala. But the great political and intellectual engine of the classic period fell silent. The jungle closed over the plazas, and for 1,000 years the glyphs kept their secrets, waiting for the day we would learn to listen. Yet the Mayas' intricate calendars measured a time that would run out for them, while in a distant corner of the ancient world, another civilization was inventing a new way to measure value itself. The kingdom of Lydia, nestled in the fertile valleys of western Anatolia, holds a secret so fundamental we still carry it in our pockets today: the coin. This was not just an economic innovation, it was a state secret weaponized for power. Before Lydia, trade relied on barter or cumbersome, weighed-out pieces of precious metal. Then, around the 7th century BC, Lydian kings made a revolutionary decision. They began stamping lumps of a naturally occurring gold and silver alloy called electrum with official symbols, a lion's head representing the royal house. This stamp was a guarantee, a promise from the king that this piece of metal contained a specific weight and purity. In an instant, trust was transferred from the merchant's scale to the king's insignia. The secret was control. By monopolizing the production of these first coins, the Lydian state centralized economic power, streamlined tax collection, and funded its army and government with unprecedented efficiency. It was a silent, brilliant coup that transformed wealth from something you weighed into something you counted, a psychological shift that built an empire of commerce. The wealth this system generated became legendary, embodied in one name: King Croesus. His riches were so proverbial that to this day we say someone is as rich as Croesus. His capital, Sardis, glittered with gold, and his donations to Greek temples like Delphi were staggering. But Croesus harbored a deep anxiety common to the newly and immensely wealthy, a fear of losing it all. This drove him to the world of secrets he could not control, the cryptic utterances of oracles. He famously tested the oracles of Greece, sending messengers to ask what he, Croesus, was doing at a precise moment on a specific day. The oracle at Delphi alone correctly answered that he was cooking a lamb and tortoise in a bronze pot. Convinced of its power, Croesus then asked his fateful question: should he go to war against the rising Persian Empire? The oracle gave a famously ambiguous reply that if Croesus attacked the Persians, he would destroy a great empire. Taking this as a prophecy of victory, Croesus launched his campaign. He did destroy a great empire, his own. The Persians, under Cyrus the Great, routed his forces, besieged Sardis, and captured the wealthy king. The oracle's secret was not in its inaccuracy, but in its cruel precision, a lesson that the most sought-after secrets often hide their true meaning until it is too late. The source of Lydia's fabled wealth was itself a riverine secret. The Pactolus River, which ran through Sardis, was said to carry golden sands. Ancient legend told of King Midas washing away his cursed golden touch in its waters, leaving the gold behind. The reality was likely a natural erosion of gold-bearing quartz veins in the mountains, depositing electrum particles in the riverbed. Lydian prospectors mastered the art of retrieving this alluvial gold, a technique they closely guarded. This river of gold funded the world's first monetary economy, a constant, shimmering secret flowing right through their capital. Lydia's end came not from poverty, but from the very attraction its wealth created. The Persian Empire, under the strategic genius of Cyrus, saw Sardis not just as a prize, but as a financial engine to be captured intact. In 546 BC, Cyrus's forces laid siege to the city. According to the historian Herodotus, the impregnable citadel of Sardis was scaled by a Persian soldier who noticed a Lydian guard drop his helmet down the cliffs and then take a hidden, precipitous path to retrieve it. The Persian marked the route, returned that night with a crack team, and unlocked the city from within. The kingdom, built on the secret of stamped metal, fell to the secret of a forgotten footpath. Yet the Persian conquerors were pragmatic. They adopted the Lydian coinage system, spreading it across their vast empire. The secret of the coin, once Lydia's alone, became the currency of the ancient world, a silent power that outlasted the kingdom that invented it. What does it mean for a civilization's greatest legacy to be a tool so successful it ceases to be a secret at all, becoming instead the invisible foundation of every transaction that followed? The coinage of Lydia financed empires, but one kingdom learned to weaponize secrecy itself against the greatest power of its age. Perched on the rugged southern coast of the Black Sea, the kingdom of Pontus was a land of mountain fortresses and deep harbors, a place where Persian tradition and Greek ambition fused into a singular, defiant identity. Its most famous king, Mithridates VI, did not just rule this realm. He transformed his own body into a fortress and his court into a labyrinth of plots, all aimed at a single, seemingly impossible goal: breaking the back of the Roman Republic. His life was a masterclass in strategic secrecy, beginning with a childhood spent in hiding. Fearing assassination by his own mother, the young prince fled into the wilderness, legend says, for 7 years. This was not idle exile, it was a formative education in survival. He learned the languages and customs of the diverse tribes in the Pontic hinterlands, future soldiers for his army, and he began a lifelong, obsessive study of poisons and their antidotes. He returned to seize his throne, but he never forgot the lessons of the forest: trust no one and prepare for every betrayal. His most famous personal secret was his quest for the ultimate defense: Mithridatism, the practice of self-administering non-lethal doses of toxins to build immunity. He was said to test his formulas on condemned prisoners, meticulously refining a universal antidote that came to be known as Mithridatium. He carried this secret compound with him always, a physical embodiment of his belief that the world was out to poison him, and that knowledge was the only true antidote. This personal paranoia scaled into a national strategy. For decades, he prepared for war with Rome in plain sight, yet the full scope of his preparations was a closely guarded secret. He fortified remote mountain passes, stockpiled weapons and grain in hidden caches, and built a powerful, innovative army that blended the heavy cavalry of his Persian ancestors with the disciplined phalanxes of the Greek world. His greatest clandestine weapon, however, was his network of alliances. He secretly courted the Greek cities of Asia Minor, chafing under Roman tax collectors, and reached out to distant barbarian tribes north of the Black Sea, promising shared loot and freedom from Roman encroachment. He was weaving a vast, hidden web designed to snap shut around the Roman legions when the moment was right. That moment came in 88 BC, in a stunning, coordinated strike that revealed the breadth of his secret planning. Mithridates orchestrated the simultaneous massacre of tens of thousands of Roman and Italian citizens living in Asia Minor, an event known as the Asiatic Vespers. It was a brutal declaration of total war, shocking in its scale and execution, proving he had covert agents and sympathizers planted throughout the region. For a time, he succeeded, sweeping Roman forces from the eastern provinces. But Rome, once fully awakened, was a relentless enemy. The following decades became a series of epic conflicts, the Mithridatic Wars, where the king's genius for evasion and secrecy met the brute force persistence of generals like Sulla, Lucullus, and finally Pompey the Great. Mithridates was a master of the strategic retreat, luring Roman armies deep into the harsh Pontic interior only to vanish, his fleet slipping away from blockaded ports through hidden coves known only to local pilots. Even in his final defeat, the mystery deepened. Cornered in his coastal fortress of Panticapaeum and facing rebellion from his own son, the aged king decided to end his life by poison. Yet, according to the dramatic tale told by historians like Appian, his legendary immunity failed him. The poison had no effect. He was then forced to ask a loyal Celtic bodyguard to run him through with a sword. Whether true or embellished, the story cemented his legend. The man who spent a life outwitting poison was ultimately betrayed by his own most famous secret. His death did not erase his impact for generations. He remained the nightmare of the Roman East, a symbol of a cunning, resilient enemy who used the secrets of the land and the disaffection of the people to challenge an empire. He proved that secrecy could be a kingdom's most potent weapon, turning the very geography of the Black Sea into a shield and a dagger aimed at the heart of Rome. The sword was not the only weapon in the arsenal of the secretive king. On the Korean peninsula, another elite order understood that true power was a fusion of body, spirit, and art, a philosophy so guarded it became the soul of a nation. In the Silla kingdom, the path to becoming a leader was not taught in a palace school, but in the mountain forests by moonlight. This was the way of the Warang, the Flowering Knights, an aristocratic youth corps that formed the kingdom's secret spiritual and military backbone. Young sons of nobility were not simply trained as soldiers, they were formed as living works of art. Their curriculum was a triad known as Seonmudo, combining rigorous martial arts, deep immersion in Buddhist and Taoist philosophy, and the cultivation of the arts, particularly poetry and music. They would journey to sacred sites, composing verses to the beauty of nature and contemplating the ephemeral, all while honing their bodies into lethal instruments. This was not a public spectacle, but a closed, intensive retreat. The Warang Code, the Sesok Oji, or 5 secular commandments, emphasized loyalty, filial piety, trust among friends, courage in battle, and a prohibition on wanton killing. This created a brotherhood bound by something deeper than feudal obligation, a shared secret understanding of power that was as much about inner harmony as outer conquest. Their influence was invisible yet everywhere. Many of Silla's greatest generals and statesmen emerged from their ranks, their decisions guided by this unique blend of discipline and aesthetic sensitivity. The kingdom they served was itself laid out according to a hidden blueprint. The capital, Gyeongju, was planned using the principles of Pungsu, Korean geomancy, a belief system that seeks to harness the beneficial energies of the land. Mountains and rivers were not just scenery, they were channels of cosmic force. The city was positioned in a basin surrounded by protective peaks, with its palaces and temples carefully sited to align with these natural energies, ensuring prosperity and stability. It was a secret map of power written in the very topography. The proof of that prosperity, however, was buried deep. The Silla royalty interred their kings in large, grass-covered tomb mounds that dotted the capital, resembling gentle hills. For centuries, they kept their secrets. Then, in the 1970s, archaeologists opened the Heavenly Horse tomb, named for a painting found within. The opulence was staggering. They uncovered a king's skeleton adorned with a crown of pure, shimmering gold. This was no simple circlet, but a masterpiece of delicate, branching antler-like forms and dangling jade ornaments, a tree of life rendered in precious metal. Belts of solid gold plaques, jeweled earrings, and exquisite glassware from as far away as the Roman Empire spoke of a kingdom immensely wealthy and connected, its luxurious reality hidden under earthen mounds for over a millennium. This hidden wealth fueled Silla's greatest political secret, its rise to supremacy. For centuries, the Korean peninsula was divided into three rival kingdoms, Goguryeo, Baekje, and Silla. Silla, in the southeast, was initially the weakest. Their path to unification was one of brilliant, secret diplomacy and ruthless timing. They formed a clandestine alliance with the colossal Tang dynasty of China, a dangerous gamble that invited a powerful neighbor onto the peninsula. In a series of coordinated campaigns, Silla and Tang forces first crushed the kingdom of Baekje, then turned on the mighty Goguryeo. But Silla's true objective was always a unified Korea under its own control. Once their rivals were defeated, they secretly turned on their Tang allies, instigating and winning a series of battles that ultimately expelled the Chinese forces. It was a breathtaking double cross, a masterstroke of covert statecraft that unified most of the peninsula under Silla rule for the first time in history. At the heart of this confident new kingdom stood a monument to both faith and hidden technology, the Hwangryongsa Pagoda. This 9-story wooden tower, built in the 7th century, was said to be the tallest structure in East Asia at the time, a literal axis mundi connecting earth and heaven. Its construction was believed to have been guided by the advice of a mysterious monk, and it housed a relic of the Buddha. The pagoda stood as a physical declaration of Silla's divine mandate and architectural prowess, a secret of engineering that made the skyline itself a statement of power. The Silla kingdom presents a captivating duality, a culture that buried its most dazzling treasures in the dark earth while cultivating an elite whose greatest strength was an invisible, enlightened mind. How does a civilization conquer a peninsula not just with armies but with poetry, and choose to hide its kingly gold where only the grass would grow? But the most unforgiving deserts can hide the most astonishing secrets. Far from the jungles and rivers in the heart of the Sahara, the Garamontes built a kingdom not by conquering the desert but by tunneling into its soul. Their secret was written in water, a language of life they learned to speak in a world of sand and stone. While the Romans saw them as nomadic barbarians on the empire's southern fringe, the truth was a sophisticated civilization thriving in the Fezzan region of modern-day Libya, a network of hidden oases powered by an invisible web beneath the earth. From the sky, the secret is revealed. Satellite imagery shows long, dark lines stretching across the pale desert like ancient scars, the surface traces of their greatest invention, the Fagara. These were not simple wells, but underground irrigation tunnels, sometimes miles long, gently sloping to tap into deep fossil aquifers. Teams of workers would dig vertical shafts down to the water table at regular intervals, then connect them with a horizontal tunnel, allowing groundwater to flow by gravity to the oasis fields below. It was a monumental, hidden engineering project that transformed hyper-arid valleys into lush gardens of dates, grapes, and grains. This hydraulic secret was the foundation of their power, but it came at a terrible human cost. The construction and maintenance of these vast subterranean networks relied on a massive enslaved population, likely captured from sub-Saharan African neighbors. The Garamontes were a slave society, their agricultural bounty and their very survival dependent on this brutal, hidden labor force. Their cities, like their capital Garama, were not grand stone metropolises but fortified mud brick settlements rising from the palms, centers of control for a kingdom that mastered the art of desert logistics. Their wealth flowed not just from their hidden water but from their position as the silent brokers of the Sahara. They controlled the early trans-Saharan trade routes, moving luxury goods like ivory, gold, and slaves from the African interior to the Mediterranean coast. Their camel caravans were the lifelines across an ocean of sand, and their oases were the only safe harbors in that vast emptiness. They were the essential middlemen, a secretive desert power that connected worlds while remaining isolated in their own harsh paradise. Their very existence challenges our deepest assumptions about desert isolation, proving that with the right hidden technology, even the most barren landscape could cradle a complex urban society. Yet their secret contained the seed of their own demise. The fossil water they tapped was not a renewable spring, but an ancient reservoir, a legacy of wetter climates millennia past. For centuries, their fagaras worked, a testament to human ingenuity. But slowly, inevitably, the water table began to drop, tunnels ran dry, shafts had to be dug deeper and longer, requiring even more labor. The system became harder to maintain, the agricultural output began to wane. Their decline was a slow, thirsty unraveling, a civilization gradually consuming its own lifeblood. By the 5th or 6th century CE, the fagaras were largely abandoned. The oases shrank, the trade routes shifted, and the kingdom faded into the desert from which it had been carved. The Garamantes did not vanish in war or conquest, they simply retreated into a simpler way of life as the water retreated from them. Their legacy is a haunting lesson in sustainability, a reminder that the greatest secrets can sustain a civilization for centuries, but only if the source of the secret itself does not run dry. What does it mean for a people to build their entire world on a treasure that was slowly disappearing beneath their feet? While the Garamantes tapped secret water beneath the desert on the arid coast of ancient Peru, the Moch turned to a different kind of power, one channeled through blood and clay. Their civilization flourished for over 700 years, building monumental adobe pyramids that still dominate the landscape, yet they left no written records. Instead, they spoke through their art, crafting ceramic vessels of such stunning detail and variety that they form a vivid, silent library of their world. This was not art for decoration, but a sacred language, a visual code that recorded rituals, deities, and a secret knowledge meant only for the initiated. A Moch pot could be a portrait of a warrior with his captive, a detailed scene of a healer at work, or a shockingly explicit depiction of sexual acts, all rendered with a profound realism that makes these figures from 1,500 years ago feel startlingly present. These vessels were buried with the dead, companions for the afterlife that also served as a hidden archive of Moch belief, a secret history told in 3 dimensions. The stage for their most profound secrets was the Huaca, the massive adobe pyramid complex. Sites like the Huaca del Sol and the Huaca de la Luna were not just temples but the physical and spiritual anchors of their world. The Huaca de la Luna, in particular, reveals a chilling practice. Archaeologists discovered that its walls were repainted and rebuilt in grand ceremonies, not once but many times. With each new layer, they found evidence of ritual combat and sacrifice. Captured warriors from rival valleys were brought before the priests, their throats slit, and their blood offered to the gods, often smeared on the walls or consumed in ceremonial cups. This was not random violence, but a meticulously orchestrated performance to appease the deities who controlled the most unpredictable and vital force in their world, the weather. The Moch lived on a rainless coast dependent entirely on river water from the Andes. When the rains failed in the mountains or when the destructive El Niño currents warmed the Pacific, bringing catastrophic floods instead of nourishing fish, their society faced collapse. The sacrifice was a desperate, secret transaction with the divine, a plea for balance paid in human life. the ultimate expression of this secret, sacred power was unearthed in 1987 when Peruvian archaeologists made a discovery that rewrote Andean history, the tomb of the Lord of Sipan. Buried within a modest-looking mud brick platform, they found an intact royal burial chamber, a time capsule of Moche elite life. The Lord lay surrounded by a retinue of sacrifices, including warriors, servants, and even llamas, all meant to accompany him. His body was adorned with the regalia of ultimate authority, a vision of secret power made tangible. He wore a magnificent headdress of gold and silver, enormous ear spools, a necklace of golden peanuts, and held a ceremonial scepter. Most telling were the intricate ornaments depicting the decapitator god, a fearsome deity often shown in Moche art holding a knife and a severed head. The Lord of Sipan was not just a political ruler, he was the living embodiment of this god, the central actor in the sacrificial dramas that sustained the cosmos. His tomb was a secret chamber of state containing the actual costumes and props for the rituals only hinted at in the pottery. This intricate relationship with the divine, however, may have contained the seeds of their downfall. The very climatic forces they sought to control through sacrifice eventually overwhelmed them. Geological evidence points to a series of devastating mega El Niño events in the 6th century CE. These would have brought torrential rains, washing away irrigation canals and mud brick cities, followed by prolonged drought and the collapse of the anchovy fisheries that were a protein staple. The priesthood and the lords, like the Lord of Sipan, had promised through their secret rituals to maintain the natural order. When the floods and droughts came in relentless succession, that promise was broken. The people's faith in the sacred contract, so carefully maintained through generations of secret knowledge and sacrifice, likely crumbled along with their fields. The great huacas were abandoned, their murals fading under the sun. The Moche did not vanish, but their political and religious unity shattered, their people dispersing and eventually giving rise to new cultures. They left behind no decipherable texts, only those eloquent pots and the silent, golden gaze of a lord from a tomb, forever guarding the secrets of a bargain with the gods that the sky itself ultimately refused to honor. The scent of frankincense carried more than just prayer, it carried the whispers of a kingdom built on smoke and legend. Between the stark mountains and burning sands of southern Arabia, the kingdom of Sheba, known historically as Saba, wove its reality from the very threads of myth. For centuries, its story has been dominated by a single, enigmatic figure, the Queen of Sheba, who traveled to Jerusalem to test the wisdom of King Solomon with riddles and lavish gifts. That biblical and Quranic tale is a powerful allegory, but it obscures a far more tangible secret. The Sabaeans were not myth-makers, they were master economists who turned a tree's resin into an empire. Their power grew from the arid slopes of Dhofar, where the scraggly frankincense tree, Boswellia sacra, was coaxed to weep its precious sap. This was not a simple harvest, it was a tightly controlled monopoly from grove to market. Every ounce of the aromatic resin that traveled to temples in Egypt, Babylon, and Rome passed through Sabaean hands, taxed and regulated, making them the sole brokers of a substance considered essential for communicating with the divine. Their wealth was not hidden in vaults, but invested in a feat of engineering so bold it defied their desert home, the Great Dam of Marib. This was not a simple wall, but a monumental sluice system nearly 2,000 feet long, built of stone and mortar to capture the violent seasonal floods from the mountains. It transformed the surrounding plain into a fertile green paradise, supporting a population large enough to guard the incense roads and project power across the region. The dam was their open secret, a declaration that they had tamed the very climate, turning ephemeral water into permanent prosperity. Their voice comes to us in angular, precise characters carved into stone blocks and bronze tablets, the old South Arabian script. We can read these inscriptions, and they pull back the curtain on a society obsessed with legal contracts, dedications to gods like Olmaka, and meticulous records. They tell of kings and their achievements, but they are official proclamations, leaving the private thoughts, the poetry, and the court intrigues like those of the legendary queen forever unrecorded. The location of their capital, the heart of this incense empire, remains a scholarly debate. Was it the ancient city of Marib with its mighty dam, or the site of Serwa, or another center yet to be fully uncovered? Each potential location holds fragments of the puzzle. Their interactions with the wider world were real and complex. Trade links with ancient Israel are plausible, given the demand for incense, and their rivalry with the kingdom of Aksum across the Red Sea was a constant geopolitical reality, a struggle for control of the trade routes that fed both empires. The dam, however, could not hold forever. After centuries of service, it began to fail. Inscriptions mention repairs, but around the 6th century CE, a final, catastrophic breach is recorded. The irrigation system that was the kingdom's lifeline collapsed, and the desert began its relentless reclamation. The people migrated, the trade routes shifted to the sea, and the kingdom that built its legend on the scent of sacred smoke faded into the sands. Today, the ruins of the Marib Dam stand as a skeletal monument, and the gnarled frankincense trees still grow in the silence. The Queen of Sheba remains a shimmering mirage over the landscape, but the true secret of Sheba was far more solid. The profound understanding that in a world of deserts, you could build an empire on the control of something as intangible as a smell and as essential as a single drop of water. The scent of frankincense could not travel over the mountains to the north, where a different kind of power flowed across the grasslands with the wind. For the Han Dynasty of China, the greatest threat was not a rival kingdom, but a shadow on the horizon, a confederation of nomadic tribes known as the Xiongnu. They were the masters of the open steppe, a civilization defined by mobility and secrecy, whose entire history is told by the people who feared them most. The Xiongnu left no cities, no monuments, and no written records of their own. Their voice comes to us solely through the brushstrokes of Chinese historians and the silent archaeology of their burial mounds on the Mongolian plains. To the settled Han Chinese, they were the ultimate barbarians, a chaotic force of nature that had to be contained by the world's largest defensive structure, the Great Wall. But this view misses the profound sophistication hidden within their nomadic way of life. Their political organization was a secret of remarkable flexibility. They were not a random horde, but a confederation of tribes united under a single ruler called the Chanyu. His power was both absolute and itinerant, his court a movable capital of felt tents that could vanish and reappear across thousands of miles. This was their genius, a state without a fixed address, impossible to pin down or conquer in a decisive battle. How do you defeat an enemy whose capital is the saddle of a horse? The Chanyu commanded loyalty through a mix of charisma, military success, and the distribution of plunder from raids into Chinese territory. Their economy was a secret of perpetual motion, based on herding, hunting, and the systematic extraction of wealth from their sedentary neighbors. This relentless pressure forced China to respond not just with walls, but with secrets of its own. The Han Dynasty employed a complex, often humiliating system of secret diplomacy and tribute. They would send princesses to marry Xiongnu leaders in so-called peace marriages, along with vast shipments of silk, grain, and luxury goods. This was bribery on an imperial scale, a hidden cost of peace meant to buy time and create factions within the nomadic confederation. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it failed, but it was always a clandestine game of influence played out across the frontier. The mystery of the Xiongnu deepens when we ask who they really were. Their ethnic and linguistic origins are still debated, a secret lost because they never wrote it down. Their artifacts, recovered from frozen tombs, show a stunning artistic style centered on animal combat, golden stags and tigers locked in eternal struggle, similar to the art of the Scythians further west. This has led to one of history's great speculative connections. were the Xiongnu, the ancestors of the Huns who would later terrorize Europe under Attila. The timeline and the geography make it possible, a migration of a people and a name across the spine of Eurasia, but it remains a haunting question without a definitive answer. The Chinese depictions of them, painted on tomb walls or described in texts, are a mixture of observation and propaganda. They show them as fierce warriors with distinctive hairstyles and riding their small, sturdy steppe ponies. These images were meant to warn and inform, but they also freeze a complex people into a simple archetype of the enemy. In the end, the Xiongnu Confederation did not fall to a great military defeat, but to internal division and the relentless pressure of Han expansion. As Chinese armies pushed north and secured alliances with rival tribes, the Xiongnu unity shattered. Some factions were absorbed, others migrated west, fading into the vastness of Central Asia. Their legacy is the ultimate nomadic secret, a powerful empire that existed as a verb rather than a noun, defined by movement and relationship, leaving behind only the echo of hoofbeats and the long, silent wall built to keep them out. What does it mean for a civilization's only portrait to be painted by its greatest enemy? A wall built to keep the nomads out speaks of a world divided, but high on a lonely mountain in Anatolia, a king tried to build a bridge between worlds, a monument to a secret so personal it defied the very categories of his time. The kingdom of Commagene was a tiny, wealthy buffer state perched precariously between the Roman Republic and the Parthian Empire, a place where survival depended on a delicate, secret diplomacy. Yet its most lasting legacy is not a treaty, but a tomb, a staggering act of ego and syncretism carved into the peak of Nemrut Dag. Here, King Antiochus I, a man of both Persian and Greek ancestry, attempted a theological and political fusion so audacious it was meant to outlast empires. He declared himself a god, the righteous culmination of two great traditions, and built his sanctuary 2,000 meters above the world to prove it. The approach is a pilgrimage. You climb through the thinning air, and as you reach the summit at dawn, you find not a palace, but a man-made mountain atop a mountain, a colossal tumulus of crushed stone nearly 50 meters high. Flanking this artificial hill are three vast terraces, and on the eastern and western ones, seated in eternal council, are the gods, or rather, the giant, serene heads of the gods, each carved from single blocks of limestone, their bodies immense thrones carved from the living rock. But look closer, the deities are familiar yet strangely blended. You see Zeus, but also the Persian god of wisdom, Oromasdes. You see Apollo, but he shares the features of Mithras, the Persian god of light and covenant. Hercules sits alongside the Persian god of strength, Artagnes, and among them, as an equal, is the beardless, crowned head of Antiochus himself, sharing a handshake, a dexiosis, with the gods. This was his secret, not hidden, but proclaimed in stone to the empty sky. He was not merely a king honoring the gods, he was inserting his own lineage and person into the divine pantheon, creating a new, state-sponsored religion where worshipping the gods meant worshipping the king's eternal, deified spirit. The entire complex was a cosmic clock and a tomb. The alignment of the statues was precise, designed so that on certain days, the rising and setting sun would illuminate the figures in a dramatic play of light and shadow, a public spectacle for a remote, inaccessible audience of priests and the heavens themselves. Beneath the 1,000,000 tons of crushed stone in the central tumulus, Antiochus intended his body to rest, forever protected and forever exalted above the petty squabbles of the empires below. His kingdom's earthly strategy mirrored this celestial balancing act. Commagene's power came from controlling vital crossings on the Euphrates River and rich mineral resources. To keep his small kingdom independent, Antiochus and his successors became masters of a diplomatic secrecy, playing Rome and Parthia against each other with carefully calibrated alliances, marriages, and promises of military support that were often just enough to maintain the status quo. They were the essential neutral party, a secret pivot point in the great power struggle. For a time, it worked brilliantly, but such a position is inherently fragile. The Romans, growing ever more powerful, eventually grew impatient with the pretense. In 72 CE, the Emperor Vespasian ordered the final annexation of Commagene, absorbing it into the Roman Empire. The kingdom vanished from the political map, its clever diplomacy rendered obsolete. Yet on the mountaintop, the king's secret endured. The tomb was looted in antiquity, his body likely taken, but the statues were too massive to destroy. They were simply left to the mercy of the elements. Earthquakes toppled the giant heads from their thrones, and they now sit in majestic rows on the terraces, gazing eternally across the breathtaking, empty landscape, their noses weathered away, their expressions inscrutable. The sanctuary was forgotten by the wider world for centuries, a secret kept by the shepherds who grazed their flocks on the lower slopes. Today, visitors brave the climb to witness the sunrise, watching the cold stone head slowly warm to a fiery gold. We see the audacity of a king who believed he could bridge heaven and earth, Persia and Greece in his own person. But the silence that now surrounds those heads asks a haunting question. What remains of a secret faith when the believers are gone, and only the gods frozen in stone are left to keep watch? The silent gods of Nemrut Dag gaze over a landlocked kingdom, but the greatest secrets are often kept by the sea. In the humid, monsoon-swept islands of Southeast Asia, the Srivijaya Empire built a realm with no borders, only horizons. This was a thalassocracy, a maritime empire whose power was measured not in acres of land, but in control of the world's most vital choke point, the Strait of Malacca. For over 6 centuries, from the 7th to the 13th, Srivijaya was the invisible hand guiding the spice trade, a ghostly superpower that left its capital as a rumor whispered on the waves. Their secret was simple and absolute: control the strait, control the world. Every ship sailing between China and India, laden with silks, porcelain, spices, and incense, had to pass through this narrow, pirate-infested channel. The Srivijayan kings did not just tax this traffic, they mastered it. Their fleets of swift outrigger vessels patrolled the waters, offering protection for a fee and ensuring no rival could challenge their monopoly. Their wealth was the stuff of legend, attracting scholars and monks who described palaces roofed in gold. But the source of that wealth was a closely guarded network of alliances with port cities and hinterland suppliers. They were the ultimate middlemen, and their greatest asset was a secret map of currents, monsoon winds, and safe harbors known only to their pilots. This maritime dominance fueled a spiritual mission. Srivijaya became a dazzling center of Buddhist learning, a beacon that attracted pilgrims like the Chinese monk Yijing, who studied there for years on his way to India. The empire sponsored grand monasteries and universities, most famously the one at Nalanda in India, establishing itself as a patron of international Buddhism. This was not merely piety, it was soft power. By positioning themselves as the guardians of sacred knowledge and a safe haven for travelers, they cemented their reputation and drew even more trade into their orbit. The spread of their cultural influence is etched in stone across the region, from the majestic Borobudur in Java to inscriptions found as far away as the Philippines. Yet for all its renown, the empire's physical heart remains one of history's great maritime mysteries. Where was the capital? Ancient texts speak of a magnificent city, but modern archaeology has struggled to find it. The leading theory is profoundly evocative, that the Srivijayan capital was not a fixed city on dry land, but a sprawling, stilt-house metropolis built over water, possibly at the site of modern Palembang on Sumatra. Such a construction, made of perishable wood on shifting river silt, would have left little trace. Worse, the entire region is sinking. Geological subsidence means that what was once a bustling port may now lie submerged beneath murky river water and layers of mud. The empire's command center is literally a secret kept by the seafloor, a lost Atlantis of Southeast Asia. their political structure was as fluid as their capital. Srivijaya was less a centralized state and more a confederation of trading ports and riverine settlements bound by loyalty to a paramount king or Maharaja. This king's authority was maintained through a complex secret web of personal oaths, strategic marriages, and the calculated distribution of trade privileges. It was a system designed for flexibility, not monument building, which explains why they left behind few of the grandiose stone temples of their mainland contemporaries. Their monuments were their harbors and their ledgers. This very flexibility, however, made them vulnerable to a different kind of power. In the 11th century, a new rival rose from the Coromandel coast of India, the mighty Chola Empire. The Cholas were also a naval power, but with a centralized militaristic drive that Srivijaya could not match. The conflict was inevitable, a clash between the established gatekeeper and the ambitious newcomer. In 1025, the Chola king Rajendra launched a spectacular surprise naval raid across the Bay of Bengal. His fleet struck directly at the heart of Srivijaya, sacking its ports and capturing its king. This was not a war of conquest for territory, but a brutal demonstration aimed at breaking the monopoly. The Cholas wanted a direct line to the spice sources of Southeast Asia, and they were willing to shatter the old secret network to get it. The raid was a shock from which Srivijaya never fully recovered. While the empire persisted for another 2 centuries, its control over the strait was compromised. New ports arose, trade routes diversified, and the secret knowledge that had been their source of power slowly diffused. Srivijaya faded, its wooden capital succumbing to silt and water, its political web unraveling. Today, its memory survives in scattered inscriptions, in the cultural Buddhism it helped propagate, and in the enduring strategic importance of the strait it once commanded. The empire built on the secretive movement ultimately fell to a force that moved faster, leaving us to wonder what a city of wood and water, the command post of a maritime age, truly looked like before it sank beneath the waves. Mountains are not just barriers, they are sanctuaries of stone. High on the Armenian plateau, where the snow-capped peak of Mount Ararat stands as a silent, eternal witness, the kingdom of the Artaxiads forged a legacy of survival in plain sight of 2 voracious empires. For Armenia, secrecy was not a luxury, it was the bedrock of national existence, a complex dance of shadows performed between the Roman legions to the west and the Parthian horse lords to the east. Their story is one of brilliant, hidden diplomacy and a cultural identity so resilient it would outlast the very empires that sought to consume it. At the height of this power stood Tigranes the Great, a king who understood that true strength often meant knowing when to appear mighty and when to become invisible. He built a new capital, Tigranocerta, a city designed as a grand statement of Armenian prestige, filled with Greek theaters, Persian-style gardens, and a population forcibly relocated from across his conquered territories. This was a deliberate, synthetic display of power, a public face meant to impress allies and intimidate rivals. Yet the kingdom's true heart was not in this cosmopolitan showpiece, but in the labyrinth of mountain fortresses that dotted the rugged highlands. These were not simple castles, but entire communities carved into and perched upon sheer cliffs, like the ancient citadel of Irabuni. Accessible only by narrow, treacherous paths, these strongholds were natural vaults, places where the royal treasury, the army, and the very soul of the nation could retreat and become untouchable. When a Roman or Parthian army marched into the fertile valleys, the Armenians would simply melt into the rocks, forcing their enemies to wither in the harsh terrain or risk everything on a futile siege. This geographical secrecy was their ultimate defense, a hidden redoubt that no foreign power could ever permanently hold. But their maneuvers were not just military, they were profoundly diplomatic. The kings of Armenia became masters of a delicate, secret statecraft, a double game of survival. They would swear fealty to Rome, accepting a crown from the hands of a Roman general, while simultaneously negotiating marriage alliances with the Parthian royal family. They played the rival superpowers against each other with breathtaking skill, offering just enough loyalty to each to secure their own throne, but never so much that they became a mere province. Their court was a whispering gallery of spies, ambassadors, and secret treaties, where a king's survival depended on reading the hidden intentions of both his powerful neighbors and his own scheming nobility. Beneath this political ballet lay a deeper spiritual mystery, the secret world of pre-Christian Armenian paganism. Before the nation adopted Christianity in the early 4th century, becoming the first state to do so, it worshipped a pantheon of gods that blended ancient Hurrian, Eurasian, and Persian deities. Chief among them was Aramazed, a sky father figure, and Anahit, a goddess of fertility and wisdom revered as the mother of the nation. Our knowledge of their rituals and theology, however, is fragmentary, filtered through the writings of later Christian historians who sought to erase this pagan past. Temples were torn down, idols destroyed, and sacred stories were lost or transformed. The intimate details of their ceremonies, the prayers spoken at mountain shrines, the meaning behind the animal sacrifices, all of this is a religious secret that conversion deliberately buried. We see only echoes in folklore and in the stubborn survival of certain symbols and festivals that were grafted onto the new Christian faith. The end of Tigranes' grand empire was a lesson in the limits of overt power. His expansion inevitably drew the direct wrath of Rome, leading to a decisive defeat by the general Lucullus. The magnificent Tigranosoter was sacked, and the king was forced into a humiliating treaty. Yet the kingdom itself did not disappear. It contracted back into its mountain core, its rulers returning to the old, secret playbook of balance and negotiation. The grand capital was a fleeting dream, but the highland fortresses and the cunning diplomacy remained. Armenia's secret was not in building an empire that could defeat Rome or Parthia, but in cultivating an identity so rooted in its formidable landscape and so agile in its politics that it could never be fully extinguished. It learned to bend like a reed between two stone giants, always springing back, its true strength hidden in the rocks and the resilient hearts of its people. What does it mean for a nation's survival to depend not on winning great battles, but on perfecting the art of the strategic retreat? The mountain fortresses of Armenia spoke of a secrecy born from survival, but on the plains of ancient India, an emperor chose to carve his conscience into stone for all to see. The Mauryan Empire under Ashoka presents history's most dramatic public confession, a ruler who turned his deepest, darkest secret into the founding principle of his reign. His story begins not with enlightenment, but with a calculated, brutal conquest shrouded in the grim silence of war. In the 8th year of his rule, around 260 BC, Ashoka marched his immense army east to the kingdom of Kalinga, a prosperous coastal region that had resisted Mauryan control. The battle was not just a victory, it was a massacre. Ancient sources, though sparse, hint at the horrific scale: 100,000 soldiers killed, even more civilians dead from the aftermath, and 150,000 people taken captive. This was the secret violence at the heart of empire building, the terrible cost of unification that most rulers celebrated or simply erased from the record. Ashoka won, and the Kalinga region was his, but the silence that followed was different. It was not the silence of triumph, but of a profound personal horror. What the emperor saw on the battlefield, the rivers of blood and the fields of the dead, shattered him. This moment of private crisis, this secret trauma witnessed only by the victor, became the catalyst for one of history's most radical transformations. He turned away from violence, embraced the teachings of the Buddha, and dedicated the rest of his life to Dharma, a principle of moral law, non-violence, and compassionate governance. But here lies the central mystery of Ashoka, the man. His earlier life, the prince before the king, is obscured by the brilliant light of his later edicts. We know little of his youth, his rivalries, or the inner workings of the court that produced such a ruthless conqueror. His personal transformation is a secret he himself chose not to explain in intimate detail. Instead, he communicated his change through the most public medium imaginable, stone. Across the length and breadth of the subcontinent, from the dusty plains of Afghanistan to the deep south of India, Ashoka ordered his new philosophy to be inscribed on polished sandstone pillars and on the faces of great rocks. These were not hidden in temples or royal chambers. They were placed along busy trade routes and at pilgrimage sites, written in the local dialects of the people, not in the elite Sanskrit. He was broadcasting his remorse and his new law to the world. The pillars themselves are marvels of engineering and art, some standing over 40 feet tall, topped with magnificent capitals. The most famous is the lion capital from Sarnath, where 4 majestic lions stand back to back, now the national emblem of India. Each component is rich with Buddhist symbolism, proclaiming a message of peaceful authority that echoed across the empire. The inscriptions are astonishingly candid. In the rock edicts, Ashoka speaks directly to his subjects. He expresses his deep remorse for the suffering at Kalinga, declaring that the slaughter, death, and deportation of the people there is a matter of profound sorrow and regret to his sacred majesty. He renounces further military conquest, advocating instead for conquest by Dharma. He outlines a revolutionary code of ethics, promoting respect for all religious sects, obedience to parents, generosity to friends and priests, and humane treatment of servants and animals. He even mentions the medicinal herbs he has imported and planted along roads for the benefit of people and animals. This was a bureaucratic yet deeply moral vision of kingship etched into the landscape. Yet for all this transparency, a poignant secrecy remains. The edicts tell us what Ashoka wanted his empire to know, the reformed ruler, the just king. They are a curated portrait. They do not reveal the nightly struggles of a man haunted by his past, the political resistance he may have faced from his own court and military, or the private doubts that must have accompanied such a radical shift. The earlier Ashoka, the ambitious prince who seized the throne and waged a terrible war, is a ghost glimpsed only through the veil of his own profound public atonement. His empire, mapped from these edicts, was vast, stretching from the Hindu Kush to the Bay of Bengal. But its true legacy was not its borders, which crumbled within decades of his death, but the enduring echo of his carved words. For centuries after the Mauryan Empire faded, the pillars stood silent and misunderstood, their Brahmi script forgotten. Local legends sprouted around them, attributing them to mythical giants or ancient heroes. The man who had shouted his secret into stone had been heard and then forgotten, his message waiting in plain sight for over 2,000 years until scholars learned to read his words again. What does it mean for a ruler's greatest act of secrecy to be the violence of his past, and his greatest act of revelation to be the profound regret that followed? The silent lions of Kush still guard a script no one alive can read. After the glory days of the Black Pharaohs who ruled Egypt, the kingdom of Kush retreated south, building a new capital at Meroitic that would become the heart of a defiant, independent culture for centuries. This later Meroitic period is where Kush truly kept its secrets, speaking in a language meant only for itself. They developed a unique alphabetic script, elegant and distinct, carved onto temple walls and royal funerary tablets. We can sound out the letters, we know the phonetic values, but the Meroitic language itself remains a locked door. We stand before the tomb of a queen, able to pronounce the sounds of her name, but having no idea what her titles, her prayers, or her victories actually say. It is a civilization that wrote its final chapter in a code it never intended us to break. While the kings ruled, a different kind of power often sat beside the throne or even held it alone. The Meroitic kingdom was famous for its Kandaks, a title often translated as Queen Mother, but these were no mere royal consorts. These women were formidable rulers in their own right, sovereigns who led armies and negotiated with foreign powers. The most famous Kandak Ammonayanas faced the Roman Empire itself. When Roman forces pushed south after annexing Egypt, it was Ammonioners who led the Kushite counterattack. Historical accounts describe her as a fearless, one-eyed warrior queen who fought the Roman legions to a standstill, eventually securing a favorable peace treaty that preserved Kush's independence and exempted it from paying tribute. The image is powerful, a queen from a secretive kingdom negotiating as an equal with the greatest empire on earth. Yet the details of her reign, her strategies, and her court exist only in fragments seen through Roman eyes. What laws did she pass? What was her voice like to her own people? Those secrets are held in the untranslated inscriptions bearing her name. The wealth of Meroe was no longer solely tied to the Nile trade routes their ancestors once dominated. The kingdom made a profound economic pivot, turning inward to master the resources of its own land. They became industrial-scale producers of iron, their furnaces dotting the landscape around the capital. The acacia forests of the region provided perfect fuel, and the iron they smelted was not just for tools and weapons, but a crucial trade commodity with neighbors to the south and west. At the same time, they expanded vast cattle herds across the savannas, building an economy on livestock and metal, a self-sufficient powerhouse less reliant on the volatile politics of the north. This shift was a strategic secret, a move to anchor their prosperity in things they could control directly, deep in the heart of Africa. Yet for all this adaptation, Meroe was eventually abandoned. The decline was not sudden, but a slow fading over centuries. The pyramids, smaller and steeper than their Egyptian cousins, were built with less care. The royal inscriptions grew fewer. What happened? There is no record of a catastrophic invasion. Instead, the clues point to a quiet unraveling from within. The very acacia forests that fueled the iron industry may have been depleted, undermining a key economic pillar. Climatic shifts might have stressed both agriculture and pastoralians. There is also evidence that trade routes were shifting east toward the rising power of Axum, bypassing Meroe and slowly starving it of external wealth and contact. The kingdom did not fall, it simply dissipated, its people likely migrating and blending with other groups, its royal traditions forgotten. The capital was left to the sand and the wind, its pyramids becoming lonely mounds in the desert, and its elegant script falling into a silence deeper than the grave. What final words did the last scribe of Meroe carve, and what story of resilience and quiet departure do those unreadable lines still hold? But the silence of the Hittite archives did not just hold secrets of administration. It preserved the blueprints for a new kind of power, one that turned battlefield stalemate into a diplomatic masterpiece. The clash with Egypt was inevitable, a collision of two superpowers in the contested lands of Syria. In the spring of 1274 BC, the armies of Pharaoh Ramesses II and the Hittite king Muwatalli II met at the city of Kadesh. What followed was not a clear victory, but a fog of war expertly manipulated by both sides into a potent secret weapon, propaganda. Ramesses, returning to Egypt, had the battle immortalized on temple walls from Abu Simbel to Luxor. The carvings show a towering, solitary pharaoh in his chariot, single-handedly routing entire Hittite divisions, his divine power scattering cowards before him. It is a masterpiece of state-sponsored narrative, a public secret meant to convince his people of an overwhelming triumph. Yet the Hittite version, carefully recorded on clay tablets in the archives of Hattusa, tells a different, more cunning story. They detail a brilliant tactical ruse where Hittite spies planted false information with Bedouin nomads, convincing Ramesses the main Hittite army was still far away. The pharaoh rushed ahead with a single division, only to be ambushed by thousands of Hittite chariots emerging from behind Kadesh. The Egyptian army was nearly destroyed, saved only by the last-minute arrival of reinforcements and, according to Ramesses, his own divine valor. The truth of the day's outcome is lost, but the aftermath reveals the real secret. Both empires, bloodied and exhausted, realized they could not destroy each other. This understanding birthed a revolutionary idea, a formal, written peace. 16 years after the dust settled at Kadesh, the new Hittite king, Hattusili III, and Rameses II negotiated the Treaty of Kadesh. Cast in silver and inscribed in both Egyptian hieroglyphs and Akkadian cuneiform, it is the oldest surviving peace treaty in human history. Its clauses are astonishingly modern: a mutual pledge of non-aggression, a promise of extradition for political refugees, and a defensive alliance where each king swore to come to the other's aid if attacked by a third party or internal rebels. This was not a victor's dictate, but a secret pact between equals, acknowledging that perpetual war was a drain neither empire could afford. It transformed a contested frontier from a bleeding wound into a stable, regulated border. The Hittites secured this hard-won peace with a more intimate kind of diplomacy, the marriage alliance. Years after the treaty, Hattusili sent his daughter to Egypt to become a chief wife of Rameses. The correspondence leading up to this event, preserved in the Hattusa archives, is a fascinating glimpse into high-stakes royal bargaining. Letters fly back and forth, haggling over the princess's dowry, the titles she will hold, and the treatment she will receive. Hattusili is fiercely protective, demanding guarantees of her status. Rameses, for his part, negotiates with a mix of grandeur and practicality. This was not a romantic union, but a living, breathing clause of the treaty, a human bond meant to cement the political one. The princess, traveling with a magnificent retinue, became a permanent diplomatic envoy in Pharaoh's court, a constant reminder of the Hittite king's reach and the peace he helped forge. Behind these grand treaties and royal marriages hummed a quieter, more pervasive secret: the Hittite intelligence network. Their archives are filled with letters from vassal kings, provincial governors, and stationed officials that read like intelligence briefings. They report on troop movements, harvest yields, political rumors, and the loyalty of local elites. The Hittite court maintained a web of informants and ambassadors who provided a constant flow of information from every corner of their sphere of influence. They understood that knowledge of a rival's internal strife was more valuable than a regiment of chariots, and that a well-placed rumor could avert a war. This bureaucratic obsession with information, with recording every oath, treaty, and report, was their true imperial glue. It allowed them to manage a diverse, sprawling empire not through constant conquest, but through calculated alliances, strategic marriages, and the relentless, secret work of knowing more than anyone else. When their empire finally collapsed, it was not because their diplomacy failed, but because the entire system of international relations they helped define crumbled around them, leaving their carefully filed secrets to bake in the ruins, a silent testament to the power of the written word over the sword. That very secrecy, cultivated for centuries on the open sea, would find its ultimate expression in a city built on a clever trick. Carthage began as a Phoenician colony, but it grew into something far greater, a shadow empire whose power was whispered in every port of the Mediterranean. The Carthaginians inherited their forebears' genius for guarded knowledge and perfected it, turning maritime supremacy into a state religion of silence. Their trade networks were not just routes, they were classified state secrets. While they famously traded in Spanish silver, their ships ventured far beyond the Pillars of Hercules, down the Atlantic coast of West Africa. They established a secret outpost on the island of Kern, a place so carefully concealed that its exact location remains a mystery to this day. Here, they traded for gold, ivory, and exotic animals with African peoples, ensuring no Greek or Roman competitor could follow the trail. There are even tantalizing hints from ancient geographers that Carthaginian vessels may have reached the tin-rich shores of Cornwall in Britain, a voyage they would have shrouded in tales of impassable, boiling seas to protect their monopoly. The foundation of this oceanic empire was a technology they guarded as fiercely as any treasure: their shipbuilding techniques. In the vast, state-controlled harbors of Carthage, the Kothon, warships were constructed in covered sheds. Foreigners were strictly forbidden from entering these naval arsenals. The design of their quinquiremes, massive warships with 5 banks of oars, was a military secret. The exact method for making the waterproof pitch that sealed their hulls, the layout of their rope works, and the training regimens for their rowers were all components of a silent, industrial machine designed to dominate the waves. This secrecy bred a specific kind of paranoia in their greatest rival, Rome. To the Romans, a land-based power slowly building its own navy, Carthage was an inscrutable ancient force. They were the masters of a realm Romans could not see or easily traverse. Their wealth and reach seemed limitless and therefore deeply threatening. This cultural divide was deepened by a religious practice the Carthaginians kept hidden from the outside world, one that would become a powerful piece of Roman propaganda. In a sacred precinct called the Tophet, archaeologists have uncovered thousands of small, buried urns containing the cremated remains of infants and young animals. Inscriptions dedicate these offerings to the gods Baal, Hammon, and Tanit. While scholarly debate continues, many historians interpret this as evidence of Molech or child sacrifice, a ritual act in times of extreme crisis to secure divine favor. The Carthaginians themselves were famously tight-lipped about it. Greek and Roman writers like Diodorus Siculus later reported horrific accounts of infants placed in the arms of a bronze statue of Cronus or Moloch, only to roll into a fiery pit below. Whether entirely accurate or exaggerated, these stories painted Carthage as not just a rival, but a fundamentally alien and morally monstrous civilization. The Romans used this secret rite, whether fully understood or not, to dehumanize their enemy, framing the Punic Wars not merely as a struggle for territory, but as a righteous crusade against a people who practiced unspeakable things behind their high walls. This potent mix of economic secrecy, naval supremacy, and cultural mystery made conflict with Rome inevitable. The First Punic War was ignited over control of Sicily, but it was fundamentally a clash between a land power and a sea power that knew too much. Rome, in an astonishing feat of reverse engineering and sheer will, built a navy from scratch to challenge Carthage's guarded dominion. The subsequent wars were fueled by this deep-seated Roman fear and resentment of Carthaginian opacity. Every hidden harbor, every unreported trade good, every whispered rumor of their wealth and strange gods fed the Roman Senate's conviction that Carthage could not be trusted, could not be coexisted with, and must be destroyed. The final, brutal command of Cotto the Elder, Carthago delenda est Carthage, must be destroyed, was not just a political stance. It was the culmination of generations of paranoia bred in the shadow of a civilization that mastered the art of keeping its most valuable assets and its most profound beliefs locked away from the light. In the end, the Romans did not just burn the city, they sowed the fields with salt, a desperate attempt to erase not just a people, but the very secrets they had cultivated from the earth itself. The Maya's silent stones finally spoke, but their most astonishing secrets were not carved in monuments, they were painted on bark paper. Of the thousands of books they produced, only 4 survived the fires of conquest, and the most scientifically profound is the Dresden Codex. This fragile, screen-folded manuscript, named for the German library where it resides, is not a history or a story, but a working manual of celestial mechanics, a priest-astronomer's guide to the hidden gears of the cosmos. Its survival is a miracle, offering a direct line into a guarded chamber of knowledge that was likely the exclusive domain of a tiny, elite class. The Codex is a riot of intricate glyphs and vivid illustrations of gods, animals, and symbolic scenes, but to the trained eye, it is a sophisticated mathematical treatise. Its most celebrated section is an incredibly precise Venus table. The Maya observed that the planet Venus, which they associated with the god Caawil and with war, followed a complex cycle, appearing as the morning star for 263 days, disappearing for 50, reappearing as the evening star for another 263 days and vanishing again for 8 days before the pattern repeated. The entire cycle took 584 days. The Dresden Codex tracks this motion with breathtaking accuracy over a span of 104 years, correcting for the tiny discrepancy between their observed 584-day cycle and the true astronomical cycle of 583.92 days. This was not just observation, it was high-precision calculation, allowing priest astronomers to predict Venus's appearances decades in advance. Why was this so vital? Venus was deeply tied to warfare and the fate of kings. Its first appearance as the morning star after a period of invisibility was considered a dangerous, inauspicious time, a moment when the god of war was reborn. The Codex likely provided the ruling elite with the secret schedule of celestial omens, allowing them to plan military campaigns, royal coronations, and ritual sacrifices to align with or counteract the perceived influence of the planet. It turned the unpredictable sky into a predictable calendar of divine will, a secret weapon of statecraft. Beyond Venus, the Codex contains tables for predicting solar eclipses, another terrifying celestial event for the Maya that signaled potential cosmic imbalance. It also details the complex interlocking of their sacred 260-day Tzolk'in calendar and the solar Hob calendar, creating the 52-year calendar round that structured their ceremonial life. The pages are annotated with red and black numbers, dots and bars representing units, and depictions of deities presiding over each period. Look at a page from the Codex and you might see the rain god Chok pouring water from a jar or the death god looming over a number series. These were not mere decorations, they personified the forces at play during specific time intervals, making the abstract mathematics a narrative of interacting divine powers. This knowledge was power, literally. The ability to correctly predict an eclipse or the rise of Venus would have been demonstrated publicly to affirm the priestly elite's unique connection to the gods and their indispensable role as mediators of cosmic order. It was a form of controlled revelation, sharing the awe-inspiring result of the prediction while guarding the complex calculations behind it. The survival of the Dresden Codex, a single book rescued from a bonfire of knowledge, forces us to radically reconsider the Maya. They were not just chroniclers of time, but its master architects, building a secret science of the sky, so advanced it served as the hidden engine of their politics and faith. What other profound calculations, what other cycles of Mars or Jupiter were recorded in the thousands of codices that turned to ash, taking the full scope of their celestial genius with them? The silence of the Scythian steppes was not absolute, for in the high valleys of the Altai Mountains, the earth itself became a perfect vault. Here, in the Paseric burials, the permafrost performed a miracle of preservation, freezing time and turning a chieftain's tomb into a snapshot of a world in motion. These were not simple graves, but deep shafts lined with logs capped by mounds of stone, a construction that trapped frigid air and created a natural freezer that held its contents in perfect stasis for over 2,000 years. When archaeologists opened these chambers, they did not find mere bones and artifacts. They found the Scythians themselves, their secrets preserved in skin, thread, and breath. The most intimate revelation was etched onto the body of a chieftain now known as the Ice Maiden, though she was a tattooed warrior. His skin, tanned by the sun and preserved by the ice, was covered in elaborate animal-style tattoos. Fantastic creatures swirled across his shoulders and arms, a coiled griffin, a leaping stag, a fish scaled with intricate patterns. This was not decoration, it was a sacred map, a permanent inscription of mythic power and spiritual identity worn on the very flesh. These tattoos were a secret language of status and belief, applied with soot and needles, proclaiming his connection to the animal spirits that ruled their world long before his body was laid to rest. The cold also kept their stories woven in thread. Inside the tombs, archaeologists unrolled large, intricate felt hangings and carpets, their colors still vibrant. One famous hanging depicts a mounted rider approaching a seated goddess, a scene of profound ritual significance. Another shows a griffin tearing at a horse, a violent emblem of cosmic struggle. These were not just blankets, they were portable murals depicting the myths and ceremonies that bound their society together. The craftsmanship is astonishing, demonstrating a mastery of wool and dye that connected them to a wider Eurasian world, for the motifs echo art from Persia to the Black Sea. But the permafrost preserved more than art, it preserved a ritual. Just as Herodotus had described, they found the equipment for their sacred communion. In one burial, there was a small, portable tent frame and a leather pouch containing a cache of cannabis seeds, alongside a bronze cauldron filled with stones. The practice was clear. They would heat the stones in the cauldron, throw the seeds on them, and sit inside the felt tent, inhaling the vapors. This was their secret sacrament, a way to transcend the ordinary world, to howl with pleasure and, they believed, speak directly to the spirits. It was a private, smoky rite of passage and vision-seeking, a cornerstone of their spiritual life that written history could only hint at until the ice revealed the tangible tools. The scale of their farewell speaks volumes about their social structure and their deepest beliefs about the afterlife. A high-status chieftain was not sent on his final journey alone. His tomb was a caravan for eternity. Alongside him, they placed his most loyal horses, fully harnessed and sacrificed, their bodies preserved with their manes and tails still braided with colorful felt and leather tassels. Some wore elaborate, towering headdresses crowned with carved wooden deer or griffins. These were not mere livestock, they were battle companions and status symbols, essential for the chieftain's continued prestige and mobility in the next world. The care taken in their adornment shows a society where the bond between rider and steed was sacred, a partnership that death itself could not sever. The tombs also contained a wealth of imported goods, Chinese silks and Persian textiles, found alongside local masterpieces. This silent inventory reveals a secret history of connections that the written records of Greece or Persia never captured. The Scythians were not isolated nomads, they were the crucial link in a vast prehistoric Silk Road, moving luxury goods and ideas across the continents long before the term was coined. Their frozen burials are accidental time capsules, proving that their influence was woven into the fabric of Eurasia through trade and cultural exchange, a network sustained by the horse and hidden from the view of settled historians. What the Pazyryk burials ultimately freeze is a complete cosmology. Every item, from the tattoos on the skin to the horses at the door, was carefully selected to equip the chieftain for existence in a mirrored spirit world. The violent animal combat scenes in their art were not just decoration, they represented the eternal struggle and balance of natural forces, a universe alive with competing energies that the Scythians navigated through ritual and symbol. The inclusion of cannabis gear points to a belief in altered states as a pathway to divine knowledge, while the sacrificed horses and carts suggest an afterlife that physically continued the nomadic journey. These tombs were not holes in the ground, they were portals meticulously stocked for a voyage we can only dimly perceive. The permafrost did more than preserve leather and felt. It preserved intention, allowing us to see the Scythians not as the faceless barbarians of Greek texts, but as a complex people who painted their myths on their bodies, wove their beliefs into cloth, and rode into the next life on the same trusted horses that carried them across the windswept steppe. In their silent, frozen chambers, they finally speak, not in words but in the breathtaking totality of a world prepared for eternity. A single serpentine slab found in a gravel quarry might hold the key to the Olmec's silent world. Known as the Cascadule block, this rectangular stone tablet, roughly the size of a laptop, is incised with 62 distinct symbols arranged in clear horizontal rows. It is the most tantalizing piece of evidence that the mother culture may have had a voice after all. The symbols are not pictures of things, but abstract, repeated shapes, some resembling thrones, insects, or corn kernels. This pattern of recurring, standardized signs is what makes archaeologists debate fiercely. Is this true writing or merely proto-writing, a system of glyphs for ritual or ownership that falls short of recording full spoken language? If it is writing, it would be the oldest in the Americas, predating Maya script by nearly a millennium, and it would force us to rewrite the intellectual history of the entire hemisphere. The block was not found in a royal tomb or a temple, but in a pile of construction debris, a humble origin for a potentially revolutionary artifact. Its symbols are elegantly carved, suggesting the work of a skilled scribe, someone who belonged to a tradition, not an isolated artist. But what do they say? Without a Rosetta Stone, without any other lengthy Olmec text to compare it to, the Cascadule block is a locked book whose alphabet we do not possess. Some researchers see in the symbols a record of a ritual, perhaps a dedication to a ruler or a god. Others suggest it could be a legal document, a record of a land transaction or a tribute list from a subject village. One compelling theory notes the repeated glyph that looks like a throne or an altar, often adjacent to what might be a person's head or title. This could be a king list, a lineage of Olmec rulers finally named in their own hand, a dynasty emerging from the anonymity of those colossal stone heads. The block's very existence hints at a level of bureaucratic complexity we never attributed to the Olmecs. True writing often evolves from the needs of administration to track taxes, goods, and time. If the Olmecs were using symbols in this way, their society was far more organized with a stronger central authority than the silent archaeology of San Lorenzo and La Venta alone suggests. It means their secrecy was not born from simplicity, but from a sophisticated system of communication that was either so perishable, written on bark paper or cloth that rotted away, or so deliberately restricted to an elite priesthood that it left almost no trace. The emotional weight of the Cascadule block lies in its loneliness. It is a single page from a lost library. Where are the other tablets, the stelae, the codices? Perhaps they were destroyed in the same deliberate acts of ritual termination that defaced the monuments. Perhaps they were made of wood and vanished in the humid jungle. Or perhaps this script was never widely used, remaining the exclusive, secret tool of a tiny ruling class, its knowledge dying with them when their civilization transformed. If we could ever decipher these symbols, the payoff would be monumental. We could finally ask the Olmecs directly about their origins, their beliefs, and the true purpose of those massive heads. We could read their creation myths, understand their relationship with the jaguar and the maize god, and learn why they chose to bury their own history. It would crack open the foundational layer of Mesoamerican thought, revealing how ideas about kingship, calendar, and the cosmos, later seen in the Maya and Aztec worlds, were first formulated. For now, the slab sits in a museum, its rows of elegant glyphs a silent poem waiting for a key we may never find. It is a testament to the ultimate Olmec secret, that they may have spoken all along, but in a language so carefully guarded that even time itself has forgotten how to listen. The silence of the Cascadule block is broken by a roar from deep within the earth. Around 3,600 years ago, the island of Thera, a mere 70 miles north of Crete, detonated with a force unmatched in human history. This was not a volcanic eruption, it was a planetary event, a cataclysm that would shatter the Minoan world and seed one of humanity's most enduring secrets, the legend of Atlantis. Imagine a mountain disintegrating. The eruption ejected 60 cubic kilometers of rock and ash into the stratosphere, a plume that would have darkened the sky from Egypt to Turkey for days. The sound alone would have been deafening across the entire eastern Mediterranean, a continuous, earth-shattering thunderclap, but the true horror arrived on the water. The collapse of the volcanic cone into the empty magma chamber triggered a tsunami of unimaginable scale. A wall of water, perhaps over 100 feet high, radiated outward at the speed of a jet aircraft. Within 20 minutes, it would have slammed into the northern coast of Crete. the Minoan fleet, the source of their wealth and power, would have been smashed to splinters in their harbors. Coastal settlements like Amnissos were scoured clean, their palaces and villas reduced to foundations filled with sea-borne pumice and debris. The ash fall that followed would have blanketed the island's fertile fields, poisoning the soil and blighting crops for a generation. In a single day, the thalassocracy was crippled, yet here lies a profound historical silence. The Minoans themselves left no record of this disaster. There are no linear tablets that say, the mountain exploded and the sea swallowed our cities. This absence is itself a form of secrecy. The surviving Minoan elite, perhaps centered at Knossos further inland, faced an existential crisis. Their economic network was destroyed, their people were starving, and their divine mandate, their perceived covenant with the gods who controlled the sea and sky, was irrevocably broken. To admit the full, random horror of the event would be to admit that their priests and kings held no real control. So, what did they do? They may have done what shattered societies often do. They transformed the raw trauma into a controlled narrative, a secret history for internal consumption. The cataclysm could be reframed not as a meaningless natural disaster, but as the wrath of the gods, perhaps due to a failing of ritual or a divine punishment that only the priesthood could interpret and atone for. This internal myth-making, born from survival and shame, would have been closely guarded. To the outside world, especially the rising Mycenaeans on the Greek mainland, the story would have been different. Trade with Crete suddenly ceased. The once mighty Minoan ships stopped arriving. Refugees may have arrived on mainland shores with garbled, terrifying tales of a kingdom swallowed by the sea, of a great civilization vanishing in fire and water. Over generations, these stories distilled and traveled. They lost their specific names, Knossos, Thera, Minos, and became archetypal, a cautionary tale about hubris and divine retribution. Centuries later, these echoes reached the ears of the Athenian philosopher Plato. In his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, written around 360 BC, he recounts a story told to his ancestor Solon by Egyptian priests of an advanced, powerful island empire called Atlantis that existed 9,000 years before their time. This empire, he said, was morally corrupt, and in a single day and night of misfortune, it was swallowed by the sea and vanished. The parallels to the Minoan collapse are haunting. Plato describes Atlantis as a thalassocracy with a sophisticated palace culture, advanced engineering, and a ritual sport of bull leaping. It was located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, a common ancient term for the Mediterranean world. While Plato likely used the story as a philosophical allegory about the ideal state and its decay, many scholars believe his inspiration was a distorted memory of Minoan Crete, filtered through Egyptian records and centuries of oral tradition. The Egyptians had traded with the Minoans. They called them the Keftiu. They would have witnessed the sudden end of that trade and heard the same cataclysmic rumors. Their priests, keepers of long histories, could have preserved a version of the tale that eventually reached Solon. The debate is fierce, of course. Some insist Atlantis is pure fiction. Others point to the sheer specificity of the Thera event, the tsunami, the ash fall, the disappearance of a maritime empire, as too coincidental to ignore. The truth may lie in the fusion of memory and myth. The Thera eruption was a real geological secret that the Minoans could not fully explain, and in their silence a legend was born. The myth of Atlantis is, in a way, the ghost of a secret, the afterlife of a trauma so vast that the civilization that experienced it could only speak of it in whispers that echoed for 1,000 years, until a philosopher gave it a name and a moral, forever blurring the line between a buried archaeological layer and a lost continent of the imagination. That great bath at Mohenjo-Daro is a perfect square of silence. In the center of the city's raised citadel, surrounded by a veranda and small private rooms, it is a large, waterproof tank lined with precisely fitted bricks and sealed with a layer of bitumen. A grand staircase leads down into its depths, and a sophisticated drain allows for the water to be changed. It is an astonishing feat of hydraulic engineering, a public work of art, and a complete mystery. Was this a sacred pool for ritual purification, a communal swimming pool for the elite, or something else entirely? The sheer care of its construction suggests a purpose far beyond mere leisure. The surrounding rooms, which lack any evidence of domestic life, hint at preparation areas for participants, perhaps priests or initiates. This leads to the most compelling theory that the Great Bath was the heart of a secret civic religion. Unlike in Egypt or Mesopotamia, there are no grand temples dedicated to specific gods here. No towering ziggurats reach for the sky. This absence is profound. It suggests that for the Harappans, the sacred may not have been housed in a single, monumental building overseen by a powerful priesthood. Instead, their spirituality might have been decentralized, practiced in the home, in small neighborhood shrines we have yet to identify, or in communal, experiential rituals like those that may have taken place at the bath. The ritual, if that's what it was, would have been a shared yet intensely personal act of cleansing, not just of the body but of social status or spiritual impurity. It could have been a rite of passage, a requirement for civic leaders, or a seasonal ceremony tied to the vital monsoon rains. The water itself, so carefully contained and managed in a rain-scarce landscape, would have held immense symbolic power. Using this precious resource for immersion speaks of a belief where water was not just life-giving but soul-cleansing. Another, more speculative idea connects the bath to the heavens. Its perfect geometry and alignment have led some to wonder if it served as a still pool for reflecting the night sky, a quiet, liquid observatory where priest astronomers could track the movements of stars and planets. The silence of the structure amplifies every theory. Without texts or clear iconography, we are left observing an empty tank, listening for echoes of chants or prayers that vanished millennia ago. This architectural secret points to a broader social mystery. If there was no dominant temple, no colossal statue of a king god, how was power maintained and social order enforced? The answer may lie in the very uniformity of their cities. The standardized bricks, the grid-like streets, the identical wells, and the ubiquitous drainage systems all speak of a powerful, pervasive social consensus. Control may have been exerted not through the fear of a visible god-king, but through the subtle, unbreakable norms of community life, hygiene, and shared labor. Their religion, if we can call it that, might have been the religion of order itself, a belief in cleanliness, measurement, and collective well-being so deeply ingrained it needed no grand monuments to preach it. The Great Bath, then, stands as the ultimate symbol of this civilization's secret heart. It is not a tomb for a single ruler, but a space built for the living community, for a repeated, watery ritual that reinforced their unique social contract. When they gathered there, reflected in that still water, they were not worshipping a distant deity in a temple. They were perhaps worshipping the reflection of their own perfectly ordered society. And when they walked away, the secret of what truly transpired in that tank walked with them, leaving behind only the impeccable brickwork, waiting in the sun for a meaning we can only guess. The Great Bath's silent geometry gives way to a different kind of secret chamber, one that was never meant to be opened. For decades, our understanding of the Shang dynasty came from the grand royal tombs at Yingsu, tombs that were plundered in antiquity, leaving behind only empty pits and the ghostly outlines of human sacrifices. The voices of the kings were known from oracle bones, but the lives of those around them, especially the women, were a profound silence. That silence was shattered in 1976, not by a grand royal crypt, but by a modest, undisturbed burial on the outskirts of the Shang capital. This was the tomb of Fu Hao. She was a consort of King Wu Ding, but the contents of her grave revealed she was so much more. While the king's own tomb was a ravaged void, Fu Hao's small, rectangular pit was a perfectly preserved vault of secrets. The sheer volume of treasure was staggering: over 400 bronze ritual vessels, nearly 600 jade objects, over 7,000 cowrie shells used as currency, and a trove of oracle bones that mentioned her by name. This was not merely the burial of a favored wife, it was the state funeral of a military commander and a high priestess. The oracle bones tell her story. They record Fu Hao leading military campaigns, commanding thousands of troops against the Tu Fang, the Qiang, and the Ba, some of the dynasty's most formidable enemies. One inscription notes the king divined whether Fu Hao should gather soldiers for an attack, a clear indication of her direct operational command. In a society where warfare and ritual were intertwined, her role was complete. The tomb contained massive bronze battle axes, symbols of military authority, placed right beside the delicate ritual vessels she would have used to communicate with the ancestors. This duality of axe and chalice reveals the hidden architecture of Shang power. While the king was the supreme diviner, women like Fu Hao could hold immense delegated authority, acting as his proxy in both the spiritual and martial realms. The jades buried with her are a catalogue of symbolic power, from ceremonial blades to animal figures representing different clans or spiritual concepts. Each piece was a key to a different ritual or alliance, a physical manifestation of her network of influence. Perhaps most telling is what was not in the tomb, any evidence she was sacrificed to accompany a higher-ranking man. Fu Hao was buried with 16 human sacrifices and 6 dogs, her own retinue for the afterlife. She was the central figure, the one being accompanied. Her story forces us to reimagine the Shang court. It was not a monolithic hierarchy with the king at the pinnacle and silent women below. Instead, it was a dynamic, dangerous ecosystem where a consort could amass enough military success, ritual knowledge, and personal wealth to warrant a burial that rivaled, and in its preserved state, surpassed that of her husband. Yet this extraordinary life was nearly erased. After her burial, the location of her tomb was forgotten, even as the Shang continued to use the area. Later pits and foundations were dug around it, narrowly missing the chamber. For over 3,000 years, she lay hidden just meters away from the ravaged royal tombs, her secrets intact while theirs were looted. It is a poetic irony. The most complete picture of Shang elite life came not from a king, but from a woman whose story was preserved precisely because she was overlooked by history. Her grave too modest to attract the attention of ancient tomb robbers, yet rich enough to rewrite our understanding of an entire dynasty. What other Fu Haos are still waiting in the earth, their axes and oracle bones silently holding the untold stories of power that the official records chose to forget? The true genius of Petra was not carved in the facades but channeled beneath the sand. In a desert that receives barely 6 inches of rain a year, the Nabateans performed a miracle of liquid alchemy, turning flash floods and morning dew into a permanent, hidden oasis. Their entire civilization was engineered around a single, precious secret: water. They began by mastering the sky. The mountains surrounding Petra are not barren obstacles, they are giant, sloped catchment systems. The Nabateans carved intricate networks of channels and diversion dams into the cliff faces themselves, invisible from the ground below. When the rare but violent rainstorms hit, these channels would intercept the torrents before they could gather into destructive walls of water in the narrow Sick. Instead of flooding the city, the water was tamed, redirected into a labyrinth of subterranean conduits. They built massive, plaster-lined cisterns, some holding over 400,000 gallons, buried deep within the rock. These were not just storage tanks, they were strategic reserves, located high enough that gravity could feed the water down to the city through a hidden grid of ceramic pipes. This underground web was their most closely guarded technology. The pipes, carefully fitted and sealed, ran beneath streets and behind walls, delivering water directly to public fountains, private villas, and the lush gardens that made Petra a paradise for weary caravans. A traveler entering the city would see rose-red cliffs and bustling markets, but they would never see the source of the life that sustained it all. The water simply appeared as if by magic in pools and channels throughout the city, a constant, quiet demonstration of Nabatean power. Their mastery extended to capturing moisture from the air itself. They constructed ingenious dew-catching walls and arrays of stones that encouraged condensation, harvesting every possible drop. This hydrological secrecy was the foundation of their wealth. By guaranteeing a reliable water supply in the heart of the desert, Petra became the only safe, luxurious stop for caravans traveling hundreds of miles. Merchants paid premium taxes for the privilege of watering their animals, replenishing their own supplies, and enjoying the shade of Nabatean gardens. Control of water meant control of the trade routes, and they never let a rival learn how it was done. The system was so effective, so perfectly concealed, that when the Romans eventually annexed the kingdom, they struggled to maintain it. The knowledge was not written down in manuals, it was held in the minds of Nabatean engineers and passed down through guilds. After the great earthquake of 363 CE damaged the hidden network, that specialized knowledge was likely lost. The pipes cracked, the cisterns silted up, and the desert, patiently waiting, finally reclaimed its silence. The magnificent facades still stand, but they are the skeleton of Petra. The secret that gave it life had already drained away, leaving behind the ultimate lesson, that in the desert, the greatest treasure is not gold, but the knowledge of where to find a single hidden drop. That bronze liver from Piacenza is a map of the heavens, cast in metal and meant to be read by a priest's bloody hand. Discovered in a field in 1877, this life-sized model of a sheep's liver is one of the most tangible secrets the Etruscans ever left behind. Its surface is divided into dozens of tiny, precise compartments, each bearing the engraved name of an Etruscan deity. This was not a piece of art, it was a sacred tool, a field manual for the most secretive of all Etruscan arts, haruspicy. For the Etruscans, the will of the gods was not written in the stars alone, but mirrored in the entrails of a sacrificed animal. They believed the liver, as the seat of life and blood, was a microcosm of the cosmos itself. When a priest, a haruspex, slit open a sheep or a goat, he wasn't just performing a ritual, he was conducting a high-stakes autopsy of the divine will. He would lift the warm, glistening liver and hold it against this bronze template. Each lobe, each fissure, each slight discoloration or anomaly on the real organ corresponded to a section on the model which was linked to a specific god. A spot or a mark in the zone of Tinia, the Etruscan sky father, might indicate his favor. A dark blemish in the area of Uni, the queen of the gods, could signal her displeasure. Interpreting these signs was a complex, guarded science passed down within priestly families. It required memorizing the celestial map on the bronze model, understanding the relationships between the gods, and then applying that knowledge to the messy, unique reality of each sacrifice. This was the ultimate state secret. Before a king declared war, before a treaty was signed, or a new public building was commissioned, the haruspex would be consulted. His reading of the liver provided a divine yes or no, a celestial authorization for human action. The power this gave the priesthood was immense, but it was also a heavy responsibility. A misinterpretation, whether accidental or deliberately manipulated, could lead a city to ruin. The Romans, ever pragmatic and deeply superstitious, were both fascinated and unnerved by this practice. As they absorbed Etruscan cities, they adopted haruspicy into their own state religion, but they never fully trusted it. To the Roman mind, steeped in law and order, the Etruscan method seemed dangerously opaque, a foreign magic where truth was found in a pool of blood rather than in the clear flight of birds, their own preferred form of augury. They employed Etruscan haruspices as consultants, especially in times of crisis, viewing them as specialists in a dark and ancient craft. The very existence of the liver of Piacenza, a physical cheat sheet for communion with the gods, reveals the Etruscan desire to systematize the unpredictable, to bring order to the terrifying mystery of divine communication. It turns intuition into a technology. Yet, for all its precision, the bronze model ultimately underscores the great silence at the heart of Etruscan culture. We can see the map, but we cannot hear the prayers that accompanied its use, or understand the full weight of the decisions made while a priest's fingers traced the warm, secret contours of a fresh sacrifice. The Garamantes did not just find water, they built rivers beneath the desert. Their fagaras were feats of silent engineering, a secret network of tunnels that turned the hyper-arid Fezzan into a breadbasket. The process began with locating a distant aquifer, often at the base of a mountain range where ancient fossil water trapped for millennia pooled underground. From this source, teams of workers, likely enslaved captives from sub-Saharan regions, would dig a gently sloping tunnel back toward their oasis, sometimes for miles. Every 100 feet or so, they would sink a vertical shaft to the tunnel below, creating a line of access holes that stretched across the landscape like a dotted line on a secret map. These shafts served a dual purpose. They provided air and light for the diggers, and they became the means for removing tons of excavated sand and rock. The genius was in the gradient. The tunnel had to slope just enough for the water to flow by gravity alone, a steady, invisible stream from the distant aquifer to the thirsty fields without a single pump or bucket lift. Maintaining this hidden web was a constant, brutal struggle. Sand infiltration could clog the tunnels, and mineral deposits could slowly choke the flow. Teams would have to descend the dark, narrow shafts to clear blockages, repair collapses, and extend the tunnels as the water table slowly receded. This was dangerous, claustrophobic work, and the knowledge of how to survey the correct slope, how to brace the tunnels against collapse, and how to navigate the underground geology was a state secret, passed down through generations of specialized laborers. It was a civilization built on a hidden, liquid foundation, and the men who knew its contours held the life of the kingdom in their hands. This secret technology allowed them to support a population of perhaps 100,000 people in the heart of the Sahara, with fortified towns, extensive agriculture, and even vineyards. Their rise is a testament to human ingenuity overcoming a brutal environment. But their fall is the other half of the secret, a cautionary tale written in a dropping water table. The fossil water they tapped was not a renewable spring fed by rain. It was a finite inheritance from a wetter climatic age. For centuries, the fagaras worked, but each new tunnel had to be dug a little longer, a little deeper, as the aquifer slowly depleted. The system became increasingly fragile and labor-intensive to maintain. When the water finally retreated beyond a sustainable reach, the economic and social cost of maintaining the tunnels likely became too great. The fagaras fell silent, the oases shrank, and the desert reclaimed its dominion. The Garamantes' secret holds profound wisdom for our own era. They mastered the extraction of a non-renewable resource, building a complex society on what they believed was an endless bounty. Their civilization did not end in war or invasion, but in a quiet, thirsty unraveling when the secret source of their prosperity simply ran dry. In a world facing its own challenges of aquifer depletion and climate stress, their story is a stark reminder from the past that the most brilliant adaptation is only sustainable if the resource it depends on is treated not as a secret to be exploited, but as a trust to be guarded for the long journey ahead. From the silent water tunnels of the Garamantes to the bloody liver readings of the Etruscans, one truth emerges: secrecy was not a single tool, but an entire language. Over these 35 civilizations, we have seen it spoken in countless dialects. It was the language of power, etched into the untranslated stone of Meroitic and the exclusive coinage of Lydia. It was the language of survival, whispered in the hidden mountain paths of Armenia and the deceptive sea charts of the Phoenicians. And it was the language of the sacred, chanted in the smoke-filled tents of the Scythians and the private bloodletting chambers of the Maya. For some, secrecy was a shield protecting precious resources like Petra's water or the Garamantes' fossil aquifers from a harsh world. For others, it was a sword, a strategic advantage like the Hittites' iron or the Nabateans' control of trade routes. And for many, it was the very fabric of their identity, a covenant with the gods or ancestors too profound for outsiders to witness, preserved in the silent script of the Olmecs or the sealed tombs of the Shang. This incredible diversity proves that the ancient world was not just a map of visible empires, but a shadow atlas of hidden knowledge. Each of these nations chose to build walls not just of stone, but of silence, guarding the core sources of their strength, their faith, and their understanding of the universe. Their stories challenge us to look beyond the grand monuments and ask what was deliberately left unsaid, unwritten, and unseen. So, as we close this journey through the world's most secretive civilizations, we leave you with a question. Which of these hidden worlds resonates with you the most? Is it the maritime maze of the Minoans, the enigmatic peace of the Indus Valley, or the defiant, coded legacy of Kush? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this exploration into the shadows of history, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more journeys into the world's greatest mysteries.